Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook, Hogwarts. My plants have billions of evil points. Chapter 91. A look of cruelty flashed in Leonard's eyes. Find a way to let him drop out of school permanently, the question is how. Think of a way to throw it directly into the Forbidden Forest. That's no good. If something like this happens, the Malfoy family will definitely mobilize a group of people to search the Forbidden Forest, and then Leonard's botanical garden will be lost. Destroying his botanical garden for an imp. Not worth it. Then beat Della Camalfort to disability. Magic can cure disabilities. Even if you lose half your life, it can be saved. If Leonard makes Della Camalfort drop out of school by maiming or beating half to death, it will only lead to revenge, and he himself has nothing to do with it. And it really encouraged Harry to take a ruthless hand, let alone what the consequences would be. With Harry Potter as the protagonist character, he probably couldn't do it. Simple flesh wounds are not enough, so use black magic props. Leonard remembered that there was an illegal shop in Nocturne Alley that sold black magic items, and there was an egg shiriishi necklace in it. There is a very vicious curse on it, and people who touch it are likely to die. In 6th grade, Della Camalfo would attempt to assassinate Dumbledore using the necklace, but was unsuccessful. Does killing Della Camalfo with this thing count as karma? But the problem is still the same. Although the store is located in Nocturne Alley, a no-management zone, as long as there are people, there are connections. That store has a deep relationship with the Malfoy family. Next year, it will help the Malfoy family deal with some problems. Prohibited dark magic item. If something happened to Della Camalfo because of the products in that store, the Malfoy family could easily catch clues. Even if they ask the werewolf wizard to buy it, they would be found out by following the clues. This method still doesn't work. At this time, Della Camalfo, who was still trying to kill Leonard with her eyes, never thought of it. She just wanted to get revenge on Leonard for embarrassing him, but Leonard was thinking about how to kill him. I don't know if he will be so arrogant after learning about Leonard's vengeful character. But he didn't know that at this moment, he was still provoking Leonard with his eyes. Leonard kept smiling, and looked at Padma without even a little deviation. He was still thinking about the method in his heart. Do you use curses? The curse that Voldemort cast in the position of Professor of Defense against the Dark Arts is terrible. This thing makes no distinction between friend and foe. It doesn't matter whether it's good or bad, Dumbledore's or Voldemort's. You can't wait for this position 1 year. Curses are indeed a practical form of magic. The problem is that curse-type magic is not accessible to anyone. It is older and more evil than ordinary black magic. Perhaps there are clues in the remnants of ancient magic. The uncertainty is too great, and this idea can also be abandoned. Leonard tapped his fingers lightly on the table, and suddenly had an idea. How about using the werewolf's curse? The current magic can only heal the wound, but if you are bitten or scratched by a werewolf and left untreated for a long time, you will become a werewolf. The curse of the werewolf cannot be cured. How about turning Draco Malfoy into a werewolf without doing anything? Leonard greeted Padma with a sunny smile on the surface, but he was thinking about a vicious plan in his mind. A plan vicious enough to ruin Draco Malfoy's life. However, this idea is a bit troublesome to operate. It is not normal for a werewolf to appear near Hogwarts. But maybe there are werewolves in the Forbidden Forest. Leonard remembered that when he saw some introductions in his previous life, he said that in the Forbidden Forest, there was a special creature born from the mating of a werewolf and a werewolf. They look like wolves in appearance, but they can speak human language, and they are rational, not to a lesser extent. Unlike werewolves, they do not actively attack humans, but do carry the werewolf curse. But the problem still remains, how to let these wolves come into contact with Della Camalfo. Leonard's talent is only plant friends, not animal friends. He can't order those wolves to do what. And the curse of the werewolf is not the kind of toxin that actually exists, so Leonard can't help Midgard with a wolf's paw. Wait, what if Della Camalfort ran into the Forbidden Forest by herself? That's what Leonard remembers happening this year. When the time comes, I will find a way to sneak into the Forbidden Forest and let those wolves meet Della Camalfo. Then I will find a way to stir up conflicts and let those wolves bite Della Camalfo. After that, even if Lucius Malfoy looked for trouble, he couldn't find him on Leonard. As for the future of Della Camalfo, don't worry, there is still wolf's poison. He'd sell it to the Malfoys for the friendship of his classmates. He planned an evil plan in his heart to make Leonard feel better physically and mentally, and the beautiful girl in front of him is also more pleasing to the eye. By the way, Padma, you and I are not afraid of being made things difficult by Professor Snape. Leonard looked at Padma and talked seriously with the beautiful girl. You should know what kind of person Professor Snape is. I know, I heard from the seniors of our college that he is a very excessive professor. Padma stuck out her tongue and said that she was really afraid of this professor. Then you're still going to be with me. As a smart Lawen Keluo, you should know that Professor Snape might take revenge on me, right? Leonard raised his eyebrows. I know, but I still have a little confidence in my potions. Padma said confidently, even if you want to make things difficult, you have to explain the truth. If you answer the question correctly, you can't deduct points even if you don't. So I think Snape the professor is nothing to be afraid of. Not necessarily. Slytherin, Insidious are all compliments. Who knows what reason Snape will use to deduct points? Leonard, who never admits that he is insidious, smiled at Padma. I will ask for your advice during the potions class. We help each other. Padma smiled and raised her hands. Leonard froze for a moment, shook his head with a wry smile, and gave Li Haojiao Padma a high five. Coincidentally, Snape rushed in aggressively, and his expressionless eyes fell on Padma and Leonard. This cold temperament made Padma shrink her neck, and sat down cautiously. She wants to take back what she just said. Professor Snape is scary D.A. Snape glanced across the classroom, paused on an empty long table, snorted coldly, and walked towards the podium menacingly. The bulging cloak behind him made him look like a big bat. I didn't expect someone to be late for my class. Snape on the podium glanced at the classroom, and then at the empty desk. Oh, are you a student from Hufflepuff College? Leonard glanced at the empty table, looked around again, and couldn't help but sighed. The ones who didn't show up were Justin and Ernie, who were late again. But this time they are really miserable. Justin and Ernie were belated arrivals, and Snape's gaze was fixed on them as soon as they entered the classroom. Mr. Finlay, Mr. Macmillan, you two are late, and Hufflepuff will deduct 20 points. I hope this will give you a long memory. Snape looked at the two with a half smile. Go and sit down now, don't you want to keep deducting points? He was deducted 20 points as soon as he came up. Even Hufflepuff, who doesn't care about college points, can't stand it. Justin and Ernie sat at the last empty long table with dark faces, without speaking. All Hogwarts students know not to try to reason with the head of Slytherin, because he is unreasonable and just wants to deduct points. So since the Hufflepuff student is late, let's find the Hufflepuff student to answer the questions. Snape set his sights on Leonard. Mr. Wilhelm, what is the function of Bezoar? Where can I get it? Coprolites can be detoxified, from the sheep's stomach. Leonard replied. The answer is not very polite. You should tell the professor first. 5 points will be deducted from Hufflepuff. Snape said blankly. There was no sound in the classroom, and the students from Wenclaw and Hufflepuff all stared at Snape blankly. Is this going to kill you? Leonard's tone didn't change in the slightest. Okay, Professor. He looked at Snape, and met his gaze. Snape, who had long been used to seeing other people's thoughts through other people's eyes, remembered the previous scene and couldn't help but look away. Then he got angrier. What does Mortra rat juice do? Cure cuts, Professor. What is the main ingredient of the vitality tonic? Bai Xian, Hoklap juice, Professor. While answering Snape's questions, Leonard kept staring into Snape's eyes so much that he had to look away, and he would add the phrase, Professor, after each answer. Snape was getting more irritable. Daisy root, fig peel, caterpillar, a drop of leech juice, mouse spleen, what kind of potion can I make out of these things? Snape began to lose face, and began to ask some super classical things that were not in the book. Leonard paused and said, Professor, it's not in the knowledge book. DBBI. If you aren't in the book, shouldn't you know? Look at your know-it-all appearance, don't you want to read more knowledge? Snape was satisfied that his question stumped Leonard. Since you can't answer it, then the Hufflepuff buckle. Sorry, Professor, I just said that there is no such thing in the book, not that I don't know how to do it. Leonard smiled playfully. That's the formula for the shrinking potion, Professor. The last Professor, Leonard spoke out word by word. Then he said, as for what you said, if you are not in the book, you should not know about this problem. Leonard's eyes were full of aggression. if we knew everything, what would you do? And besides, Professor, why don't you dare look me in the eyes? Are you afraid?" There was dead silence in the classroom, as Lowenclaw and everyone at Hufflepuff Academy looked at Leonard with a mixture of horror and admiration. No one has ever dared to hate Snape like that. Leonard was the first. Snape's lips were trembling with anger, but even then he didn't meet Leonard's eyes. 50 points off Hufflepuff. Snape dropped the sentence, turned and walked up to the podium. "Everyone, turn to the first page of your books and see how to make the scabies potion." Leonard sneered, sat down and opened the textbook. As long as he didn't care about his college grades, then Snape was like a paper tiger. No matter how fierce he was, no matter how aggressive he was, it wouldn't help. If he dares to do it, Leonard will let him know what it means to be free from the warrior's punch. A week passed quietly. Each course at Hogwarts is basically one class a week. This is not to show consideration for the students, but for the professors. The same class and the same grade need to take 2 classes. There are 7 grades in Hogwarts, which means that each professor needs to go up 4 classes a week. To the professors, this extra section is 14 extra sections, which is simply a nightmare. And it's not too easy for students. There are a total of 7 compulsory courses at Hogwarts, excluding 2 days on weekends. There are classes every day, and students will never be free from classes. After class, the professors usually arrange some homework. These homework should not be underestimated. Some of them are more difficult magic exercises, such as the homework of the Transfiguration Curse course. Most courses will leave you with a written assignment, writing a dissertation on the course content. For example, the history of magic in the first grade is the history of burning witches in the Middle Ages, and the thesis is also related to this. Today is Saturday. Leonard, who has accumulated a lot of homework, plans to go to the library to understand these homework. Because Leonard would go to the botanical garden in the Forbidden Forest every day when he had time, and it would take at least an hour to go back and forth, plus the time to take care of the plants, Leonard could not finish his homework every day. Putting it on Saturday is also a helpless move. There are not a few students who put their homework on Saturday and Sunday, so after arriving at the library, Leonard found that there were no vacancies. But he did see an acquaintance. It was Harry and his friends. No Ron Weasley, just Neville Longbottom and Hermione Granger. Among them, Neville and Harry were furiously writing, while Hermione was flipping through a thick and scary book with a relaxed expression. Leonard didn't think much, and walked over. Hearing footsteps approaching, Harry and Neville, who were thinking hard about writing their thesis, raised their heads. Harry looked surprised. "Leonard, are you here to do your homework too?" "Yeah, I've been practicing magic recently, so I don't have much time to do my homework." Leonard made a silent gesture. "Hush your voice, I heard that librarians will drive out noisy people." Hermione looked over at Leonard's name with scrutiny in her eyes. "How are you doing? I heard you beat up a Slytherin student. This is a helpless thing. After all, if I don't want to be beaten, I have to fight back." Leonard sat down and spread his hands. "Forget those spoilers, Slytherin students are as disgusting as their professors." Harry curled his lips, and continued to ask, "How much homework do you have left, Leonard?" Leonard looked at the stack of parchment in his hand. "All." "Then you have to write." Neville couldn't help but said, "Harry and I have been writing every day, and we still haven't finished our papers on history of magic and potions, and we're currently writing our paper on potions." Quote. "Yeah, a 2-foot paper." Harry glanced at the larger letters he had written on the parchment and sighed. "I don't know how to fill it up." After hearing the complaints of the two, Leonard looked at Hermione. "Where's Hermione? Are you finished writing your thesis?" Hermione raised her head proudly after hearing Leonard's question. "She has already finished writing, and every paper is written in fly-sized fonts to fill a parchment." Harry complained. "Didn't you share your experience with them?" Leonard asked Hermione with a look at the resentful Harry. "I don't have much experience, I just sorted out my notes and wrote the thesis, it's very simple." Hermione struggled to keep the corners of her mouth from rising, lest others think she was showing off. "This is indeed a good idea." Leonard nodded and picked up a book on the table. "An anthology of curses in the 18th century. This is the one I picked for Harry and Neville, suitable for this charms paper about fluorescent light." Hermione saw that the book Leonard had picked up was on page 79. Quote. "It seems that Hermione took good care of the savior, which is too considerate, so it is not to blame Hermione for not being able to write a thesis. Leonard turned to page 79, and sure enough, he saw the introduction about the fluorescent spell. Since there is a detailed introduction, how can it be difficult to write? Leonard glanced at the densely packed words on the book, and picked up the quill. Even if there are materials, it's not easy to write. Harry sighed. Are you right, Leonard? Harry looked at Leonard, who was writing furiously. The pained expression on his face gradually stiffened. Can a thesis be written so fast? Don't you need to think? Leonard said. Since there are references, is it important to think about something? Hogwarts professors don't check for plagiarism, as long as it doesn't match what other students wrote. Isn't that all right? Leonard never went to college in his previous life, but he did part-time jobs and helped people write papers. He has a lot of experience in how to dismantle an easy-to-understand word into sentences that no one can understand. Let alone this kind of non-professional paper. Just copy some keywords from the book, expand it, add some personal thoughts, and a paper will be freshly released. 10 minutes later, Leonard put down the quill while the three were stunned, and picked up a written paper to dry. Leonard, are you done? Harry asked uncertainly. Well, it's done. The thesis for the charms class has been written. Leonard confirmed that the writing on the parchment had dried, put it aside and picked up another parchment. Defense against the dark arts is next, Leonard said, looking at the three of them. By the way, what do you think of the defense against the dark arts, Professor? It's boring, nothing new, he just reads according to what's in the textbook. Hermione complained. After a class, I didn't feel that I learned anything at all. It was as boring as reading the book again. Leonard picked up a book on fantastic beasts and turned to the page on goblins. How to subdue goblins. This is the first lesson of the Defense Against the Dark Arts class, and it is also their homework. Goblins. My grandma usually grabs things by the neck and kicks them away, Neville said, glancing at the illustrations of goblins in the book. Because they really don't look like dangerous creatures, so we don't know how to deal with them. It seems too strange to just write about kicking them away, Harry said. Then put how to deal with them at the end. First write their sources, characteristics, and preferences. Finally, directly say what kind of magic can be used to drive them away more easily, Leonard said while writing the paper quickly under the numb eyes of several people. That's it, don't think too complicated. The professors don't expect us to write professional papers. They just want us to consolidate knowledge. Quote, of course, Quirrell definitely didn't think so much. This guy didn't pay attention to teaching students at all. After that is history of magic. This course is a bit boring, but relatively, this is also the best subject to write a paper on, because you don't even need to think about it. You just need to write the contents of the book in your own words. After another 10 minutes, Leonard put aside the history of magic essay he had written. Harry and Neville were numb, while Hermione wondered if there was anything wrong with the way Leonard did his homework. Thinking failed, because Hermione couldn't do it at this speed, and she didn't know what kind of knowledge reserve was needed to reach this speed. An hour later, Leonard finished all the homework, let out a long sigh of relief, put down the quill and moved his stiff wrist. I'm done, Leonard said. Harry and Neville looked at Leonard's stack of neatly written papers freshly out of the oven with expressionless faces, and then looked at their own papers, which had been held back for a long time, with large and unreadable papers, and fell silent. Good. So strong. Wouldn't that be too perfunctory? Hermione asked. Will the professors have any objections? That depends on what kind of professor you are. Professor Cuthbert in History of Magic definitely doesn't care. Professor Flitwick in Charms class cares more about students' spellcasting. Needless to say, Professor Quirrell doesn't care about it himself. Courses. Leonard reviewed the professors thoroughly. The only thing to watch out for is Snape, Leonard sneered. That guy doesn't care what I accomplish, and if he makes trouble it's only because he wants to. Hearing this, Hermione fell silent. She had also heard about Snape's feat of scoring 75 points from Hufflepuff in one class. It's hard to imagine that this behavior was done by a mature professor, and even those who are used to respecting professors can't understand it. Okay, my homework is done. Leonard packed up the parchment. I'm going first. Stop reading for a while, Hermione asked. This celebrity story is very interesting. She patted the book she was reading, the thickness of which looked like it could kill someone. Leonard glanced at it, and lost interest when he saw the words on the sorcerer's stone Nicholas. No, I have some things to do. Leonard said, see you later. He stood up, walked towards the door, and glanced at the corner of the library. There is a large door with a huge lock. Looking from the outside, you can see that there are several bookshelves locked inside, and each book on it has an exaggerated iron chain. The restricted area is a place where countless dangerous books are stored. But it wasn't the banned books that Leonard cared about. In his mind, the compass pointer pointing to the next ruins pointed to the gate. The location of the next relic is within the restricted section of the library. Professor, where is this flower pot? In the greenhouse, Leonard was wearing dragon leather gloves and carrying a flower pot and shouted to Professor Sprouter, who was sorting out the fertilizer. Just put it here. Professor Sprout pointed to his side. Then add these fertilizers, which are made by mixing dragon dung and moon moron's dung, and the effect is great. Fertilizer. Leonard looked at the pile of manure exuding a strange smell, and was a little moved. His botanical garden should also need a lot of fertilizer. Leonard, who completed a week of homework in one day on Saturday, volunteered to help in the runway greenhouse early in the morning on Sunday. He didn't go to the restricted section, and he wouldn't venture into the ruins until the botanical gardens could provide him with seeds. As for the purpose of his coming to the greenhouse to help, it was naturally to establish a good relationship with Professor Sprouter and see if had a chance to get some plant seeds. Aside from those banned plants, Professor Sprout should be delighted to see an interest in magical plants. And there are other benefits, such as this kind of fertilizer. Leonard really didn't know about dragon dung and moon monster dung as fertilizer. When distributing fertilizers to the flower pots, Leonard took the opportunity to ask Professor Sprout for some fertilizers, but the professor didn't care, and generously asked Leonard to come and get them when needed. After changing the fertilizers for all the flower pots, Leonard and Professor Sprout used the floating spell to send the flower pots to Greenhouse No. 2. It is filled with mandela grass, and its lush branches sway in the greenhouse. Professor, do you need to change the basin? Leonard asked. Oh, you don't really need it. It's a lesson for second-year students, but it's actually part of the job, so if you want to try it, there's no problem. Professor Sprouter said and handed Leonard an earmuff. Put it on. Although these mandela plants are not yet mature, their calls are still dangerous and can make people unconscious. Leonard took the earmuffs and put them on. It's earmuffs that shut out unwanted sounds so they don't stop you from hearing me. Professor Sprout picked up a pot of mandela and said, now, watch me. As soon as the words were finished, Professor Sprout pulled out a mandela plant with force. A ginseng-like rhizome was pulled out, and it came up with a big mouth, screaming piercingly. Ah! Karma! Mandela, who had just uttered one syllable, suddenly closed his mouth. Professor Sprouter, who was about to meet the screams, was stunned and shook the mandela in his hand in doubt. Why don't you scream? Are you sick? Leonard was ashamed. His intuition told him that this might be caused by his talent. But fortunately, under the shaking of Professor Sprout, the uncomfortable feeling made the mandela scream again, and the harsh voice made Professor Sprout frown. While Leonard was expressionless, he felt that the voice didn't seem to work on him. Obviously, the venom secreted by the magical plant is effective on him, but the sound from the mandela grass is not effective on him. Leonard felt that his talent was a bit of a mess. That's it, shouted Professor Sprouter. So be quick, as long as it's covered in dirt, rest assured that Della will stop barking. Professor Sprout explained that the movement of his hands was not slow, and the soil was filled in 2 or 3 strokes. Okay, that's it. Professor Sprout breathed a sigh of relief. It's a terrible job to do, but I have to do it. Della grass is very inviting to the living environment. It's okay in the field. Flowers, it needs to be changed frequently in the pot, otherwise they will scream in the soil when they are in a bad mood. Leonard had a learned expression. Come on, Leonard. Professor Sprout called Leonard's name naturally. Okay, Professor Sprout. Leonard's eyes lit up and he walked towards a flower pot. He followed suit and launched a mandela under the watchful eye of Professor Sprout. Meanwhile, Leonard activates optimal growth. 3 pictures appeared in front of him, and Leonard scanned them quickly. In the first picture, a figure approached the Della grass, and suddenly the Della grass growing in the ground jumped up and screamed piercingly. When the figure covered his ears and fell to the ground in pain, the Della grass burrowed into the ground again. One is used as a passive defense, strengthening traps. In the second picture, the Mandela plant was pulled out of the pot and thrown out. The Mandela plant immediately let out a fatal scream, but was blown away by a magic. However, the deadly sound did not disappear with the Mandela being destroyed, the deadly sound was still echoing. This enhancement is deadly and terrifying, completely unreasonable, and even if it is destroyed, the sound cannot be eliminated. The third picture is a large-scale bird's-eye view map. It also threw a Della plant that had just been pulled out of the flower pot. With the scream of the Della plant, the sound was heard tens of meters away. It is roughly estimated that the range of at least 50 meters from Fangyuan is shrouded in this sound. And the sound heard in every place is the same, without attenuation due to distance. It's just that this sound is not fatal, the effect is only to make people stunned. A buff that increases the area of effect but reduces lethality. Now that the strengthening is here, Leonard should choose one to strengthen under normal circumstances. But instead of doing this, Leonard interrupted the optimal growth. This Mandela grass is not his yet, so it can't be strengthened casually, otherwise it will be a disaster to strengthen any one. While Professor Sprouter was frowning at the screams of the Mandela, Leonard quietly snipped off a small piece of root from the inconspicuous place of the Mandela and hid it in the glove. Then he put the Mandela grass in the pot and quickly filled it with soil. Soon, the scrambling sound died away, and Professor Sprout breathed a sigh of relief. You did a good job. If this was in class, I would definitely give you. Professor Sprout said with a smile, but the speed can be a little faster. It seems that you have been affected a little. Yes, Professor, that sound is really uncomfortable, especially at close range. Leonard said with a smile while pinching the small root. Just get used to it. If you want to delve into this subject, you have to suffer a little bit. Professor Sprout sighed. Leonard nodded and exchanged a few pleasantries with Professor Sprout before planning to leave. Professor, if there is nothing else, I'll go first. I still have some questions I want to ask Professor Flitwick. Leonard had the kind of bright smile that middle-aged and elderly women like most. Oh, then hurry up, kid, you can't delay your studies. Professor Sprout was more and more satisfied with Leonard, you are such a studious kid. Leonard responded with a smile, and then left the greenhouse. After leaving the greenhouse, a black hole appeared next to Leonard and sucked the small group of roots into it. Della grass is similar to potatoes, and the rhizomes can be cut into pieces and used as seeds. The magical seed bag also recognized this kind of seed, and Fu put it away without hesitation. After confirming that there was no problem with the roots, Leonard put the bag of fertilizer that eliminated the smell back into the dormitory, and then found Professor Flitwick in the Charms Professor's office. He didn't lie to Professor Sprout, he did intend to ask Professor Flitwick a question. Regarding the use of spells, Leonard felt that he needed to ask the former dueling champion for advice. Professor Flitwick is a goblin, but unlike the goblin who is greedy for money, Professor Flitwick is more interested in magic, and is known to be kind and patient with students. In front of the Charms Professor's office, Leonard knocked on the door, and pushed the door open after hearing a shrill, "Come in." "Hello, Professor, I have a question I want to ask you." Leonard got straight to the point as soon as he entered the door. "Oh, you are Mr. Wilhelm from Hufflepuff, feel free to ask any questions," Professor Flitwick said enthusiastically. "I want to ask some questions about the use of spells." Leonard showed a kind and simple image that a Hufflepuff student should have. Except for Snape, the professors at Hogwarts are very kind, and it would be nice to have a good relationship. For example, when Snape wants to sue him for being black, a group of professors who have a good sense of him will question him. Whether Dumbledore believed Snape or not, he had to do the other professors a little face. "A question about the spell. Just ask, as long as I know something, I will answer it for you." Teacher Flitwick accepted the invitation Leonard to sit down and want something to drink. "Don't bother, Professor, it's just some simple questions, I'll leave after I finish asking, I have other questions to ask other professors." Leonard smiled shyly. "You are very studious, which is very good." Professor Flitwick was a little curious, but I think I can answer most of the questions. "What questions make you plan to ask other professors?" As the dean of Lewen Keluo College, Professor Flitwick felt that he was knowledgeable enough. "It's about the Transfiguration Curse." Leonard acted like a simple-minded young man who didn't know much about the world. Transfiguration curse. Well, although I'm pretty good at it, I have to admit that Professor McGonagall's answer is more helpful to you when it comes to related questions. Professor Flitwick nodded. Then let's talk about your problem with spells. Are you using spells? Leonard nodded. When I was practicing the fluorescent spell, I realized that the fluorescent spell that suddenly lights up in the dark can temporarily blind people, so I'm thinking that other spells should be more effective when used on different occasions. It's a very good idea. I'm glad you can think of this, Professor Flitwick said with a smile, but this is not actually a question of charms. Doesn't it count? Leonard didn't have to act now, he was really puzzled. That's right, charms is more theoretical. That is, it allows you to understand a magic and learn it, and then release it through different methods. Professor Flitwick poured himself a cup of tea. Although the use of spells you mentioned is actually related to charms, the main content should be learned in the Defense Against the Dark Arts class. Defense Against the Dark Arts. Leonard's expression became a little strange. Yes, but it doesn't matter. Since you asked me, I will give relevant answers, after all. Flitwick paused. Professor Quirrell seems to be a little uncomfortable with the daily life in Hogwarts, probably because he has been running outside for a while, and some habits have not changed. It seemed that Professor Flitwick found Quirrell suspicious. In fact, all professors should feel suspicious of him. What use is there for a professor who only reads every day? He doesn't teach others seriously at all. Even Snape, whom Leonard disliked the most, at least his teaching quality was fine. It was suspected that Dumbledore had let Quirrell in on purpose. Forget about him, let's talk about spells. Professor Flitwick picked up his wand. The use of spells is a very flexible thing. Wingardium Leviosa. The teacup floated up. This is the floating spell, and it will use very light and easily affected feathers as the target of the spell at the beginning, and it will gradually become heavier later on. Professor Flitwick said in detail, but this is just a psychological hint to the students. It is difficult to affect this magic within the normal weight range. Using this magic to lift a feather is no different from lifting a person. As the professor pointed his wand at Leonard, he planned to give him a more intimate experience. Wait, Leonard was taken aback and tried to stop it, but Professor Flitwick, as a professor of charms, cast spells at an unbelievably fast speed. Before Leonard could stop it, a levitating spell hit him. Leonard's first reaction was that it was too bad. Professor Flitwick's action was too decisive, and the levitation curse is a very simple magic, which was almost instantaneous when taught by Flitwick. The loyal ancient sprout swayed and neutralized the floating spell before Leonard could react. Unlike the magic of repentance, which would be counterattacked if it was broken, the levitation curse was only immune. But even immunity was enough to surprise Professor Flitwick. The atmosphere gradually became awkward. Leonard suddenly felt that the magic defense of the ancient sprouts was a bit clumsy. For example, the sudden activation at this time made Professor Flitwick's demonstration a bit awkward. Sorry, Professor, Leonard subconsciously wanted to find a reason to fool him, but he didn't expect Professor Flitwick, who was opposite, to make a suspicious voice. As this ancient magic, a certain secret in his body was revealed, and Leonard was stunned. Is this ancient magic something very common and bad street stuff? Leonard was confused for a moment. Unexpectedly, I thought this talent was lost among wizards, and even people like Dumbledore couldn't sense the power of ancient magic. Flitwick stood up, gasping in amazement. Sorry, Professor, I don't quite understand. Leonard decided to play dumb. Anyway, he really doesn't understand ancient magic, it's all caused by ancient sprouts. You have the power of ancient magic in your body, which is an unparalleled talent. Flitwick sighed. Professor, do you know much about this power? Leonard asked tentatively. Of course, because I also have this kind of power. Professor Flitwick raised his wand slightly, and the arc of greasy silver-white flickered away. Although it was only for a moment, Leonard clearly felt the silver-white power that belonged to ancient magic, and even the ancient buds raised their heads. But something is wrong. Professor Flitwick's power is somewhat different from his own. Maybe it is his own reason, but it may also be the professor's reason. This difference reminded Leonard. He planned not to mention the ruins with Professor Flitwick for the time being. Professor, is there anything special about this type of magic? Leonard asked. To be honest, I don't know. There is no mention of this kind of power in various books. I just guessed from a few words that there should have been wizards who mastered ancient magic in the long history. Flitwick sighed. I'm a little too excited. This kind of magic is powerful. It can be seen that you are a good boy. Don't abuse it, understand? Ah, understood. The good boy, Leonard, who was thinking about killing others all day long, nodded. There are many ways to kill people. Leonard does not need to use ancient magic to kill people. Since Professor Flitwick knows ancient magic, there is no need for Leonard to use ancient magic to do bad things, because people will recognize him. Let's continue talking about spells. Professor Flitwick seemed not to want to bring up ancient magic. After the excitement calmed down, he stopped mentioning it and changed the topic back. There must be some secret here. But there was nothing Professor Flitwick could do if he didn't want to mention him. The topic returns to the levitation spell to continue. If you want a person to lose the ability to resist, most people will be used to using evil spells. Most people use this kind of spells to cast slowly. This is an opportunity. Professor Flitwick gave an example. The floating spell is the simplest spell. If you hit the opponent with the floating spell at a faster speed at the moment the opponent casts the spell, you can interrupt the opponent's casting and use other spells when the opponent is at a loss. Magic beat him. Leonard suddenly realized and nodded. Indeed, he had no time to react to Chang and Wei's floating spell. Similarly, there is the flying curse. In short, when using magic, don't always think about knocking down the opponent with magic. You also need to pay attention to the effect and coordination. Professor Flitwick said, there is also the method of casting spells. Is there anything interesting about the way the spell is cast? Leonard asked. Of course, maybe you haven't noticed that it is the magic power in the body that really works when casting a spell, not the wand and gestures. Professor Flitwick put down his wand and pointed to the teacup, Wingardium Leviosa. The teacup floated up again, and then slowly lowered down again. Professor Flitwick picked up his wand again, and this time he didn't say a spell, but waved his wand lightly. The teacup floated again. Gestures and incantations are not necessary, they are just a guide for beginners, so that they can use magic more easily. Professor Flitwick picked up the teacup in the air and took a sip. Is that silent casting and wandless casting? Leonard asked. That's right, but showing you is not for you to learn immediately, I'm just explaining the function of the technique, Professor Flitwick explained. Use streamlined techniques and spells to shorten the casting time, which will make you more powerful during the battle. Professor Flitwick made a summary. In general, it is like this. How to use it is up to you. If there is anything you don't understand, you can ask me. That Professor Leonard was going to try, the one about ancient magic. Ancient magic is not that I don't want to teach it, but that I can't teach it. It seems to be engraved in my bones, and I don't even understand it myself. Professor Flitwick shook his head. However, there are many traces of ancient magic in Hogwarts. If you are interested, you can search for it yourself, and you may find something. Then I found something that I can share with you. Leonard asked. Don't share it with me. If you really want to share your advice with someone, go to Dumbledore. Professor Flitwick said seriously. Ancient magic is not a trivial matter. Except for people like Dumbledore, it's best not to let others know. It sounds fine, and even gave a reasonable explanation. It seems that Professor Flitwick did not covet this kind of idea of the King of Power. But tell Dumbledore. Dumbledore is a good person, but if he really showed the aggressiveness of this ancient magic, he might be trained to deal with Voldemort, right? Leonard doesn't want to be a tool man. As for what Professor Flitwick would say to Dumbledore, that didn't matter. Leonard had shown no knowledge of ancient magic anyway. However, Professor Flitwick's statement is a bit strange. He clearly pointed out that ancient magic belongs to wizards, but Professor Flitwick is a goblin. And what about his ancient magic? After bidding farewell to Professor Flitwick, Leonard, who planned to go to Professor McGonagall's place to get acquainted, had mixed feelings. After thinking for a while, Leonard decided to go to the botanical garden, plant the rhizomes of Mandela grass, and fertilize them along the way. In addition, Gray sent the first batch of magical animal materials that Leonard needed, and Midgard prepared the liquid and scales of the fire dragon. It's time to upgrade the plants in the botanical garden. After an hour, Leonard, who had been wearing the illusion charm all the time and deliberately avoided the territory of the Acromantula, came to the junction of the Forbidden Forest and the swamp. Following the path hidden by thorns, Leonard walked into the botanical garden. The bitter thorns on the outside had grown weak thorns, and after feeling Leonard approaching, they shook their thorns wildly one by one, welcoming Leonard's arrival. As a peripheral bodyguard, Leonard put some more fertilizer on these bitter thorns. Seeing them convulsed with joy, Leonard smiled, patted and greeted each of them before walking into the east of the botanical garden. Here near the swamp, the wet soil grows aconitum and biting cabbage. The seeds of aconitum come from the strengthened aconitum fruit, and only the aconitum fruit will be planted, which belongs to Midgard's special supply. Leonard plans to give rice every month in the future. Dasheng 1. Biting cabbage is a common magical plant that only strengthens the root system. The reason why it does not optimize growth is to choose a strengthening direction that better suits the needs after obtaining seeds. However, one of the biting cabbage used the venom of the acromantia after swallowing it, which allowed the seeds produced by this biting cabbage to carry the venom of the acromant no matter which strengthening direction it chose. Take a bite and die immediately, the main one is a madman. There were still 2 biting kale. Leonard thought for a while and took out something from his side pocket. A small cup of dragon blood. Leonard was going to feed one of the biting kale to devour the dragon's blood. According to Leonard's prediction, the biting cabbage that swallowed the dragon's blood is likely to have the ability to breathe fire, and when it explodes, its power will be even more frenzied. After paying a small drop of dragon blood, Leonard turned around and took out a stack of dragon scales. He fed these dragon scales to half of the bitter thorns, and sting the venom of the acromantula on a bitter thorn. As the guard of the botanical garden, Leonard does not dare to feed these bitter thorns with dragon blood. This has the fire-breathing ability. In case Zhao's Zhao is invaded by enemies, it's okay if they don't do anything. If they do, they might blow up the botanical garden. So using dragon scales can probably increase the defense of these bitter thorns. This is the safest method. The venom was because Leonard wanted to gain more experience. As for why he only gave one, it was because Leonard didn't want these bitter thorns to kill people. The only bitter thorn strengthened by the venom of the acromantula was located in the innermost part. Because these plants have not yet matured, Leonard cannot be provided with experience points. Only when they are mature, Leonard can harvest a wave. It is like a farmer who plows in the spring and reaps in the fall. But 2 of the Arboretum's long-term missions don't require waiting for a plant maturity bank. You have strengthened plant types with magical animal materials: 4 biting cabbage, acromantula, fire dragon. Bitter thorns, fire dragon, acromantula. You have gained 120 experience points, currently a senior plant apprentice 311 700ths. With the fortification complete, Leonard began planting a new plant, Mandela grass. Leonard raised his hand, and the black hole in his hand opened and a root full of vitality fell out. Planted the cut root into the pre-planned area, then used the root system to strengthen, poured some water, and spread a layer of fertilizer. The plants in the magical world grow very fast, and with some magical effects, Leonard estimates that this Mandela will mature in winter. You planted a new magical plant. Currently, 4/5 you have gained 20 points of experience, currently a senior plant apprentice 331 700ths. After taking care of the plants and using up the fertilizer, Leonard tidied up and planned to take a stroll around. Before the bitter thorns fully grow, the botanical garden mainly relies on the surrounding withered thorns as a protection. Always pay attention to the traces around it to judge the current situation of the botanical garden and whether it is being targeted by anything. I walked around the withered thorns and confirmed the traces of beasts and excrement around. Leonard was relieved to find no strange traces. The current botanical garden is still very fragile. Leonard doesn't want what he has worked so hard to get ruined. It would be great if we could transplant some mature magical plants. Leonard looked at the botanical garden hidden in the withered thorns and sighed. This is not easy. Very few people will sell mature magical plants, especially the dangerous ones that even the seeds are forbidden to sell. Those are cash cows. By the way, I haven't tried my new talent yet. Thinking of this, Leonard remembered his plant radar talent. Can sense the location of magical plants. Maybe you can encounter some dangerous mature magical plants. With this in mind, Leonard automatically launched plant radar. The invisible fluctuations spread out towards the surroundings, and the place where the fluctuations brushed formed a gray and white outline in Leonard's eyes. As the scope of observation expanded, Leonard felt that his field of vision was elevated, and he saw a flat map centered on himself and surrounded by a huge area from the perspective of God. And on this gray and white flat map, there are some green light spots. Except for the botanical garden behind Leonard, which has a large area of dense light spots, the light spots in other places are very sparse, and the nearest ones are hundreds of meters apart. Can you only see the location, but not the specific variety? Leonard felt a little regretful. But you can't ask too much, it's good to be able to point out the specific location. It's better than scurrying around like a headless chicken or waiting for Midgard to find out the plants. It's better to get a map. But looking at the dots on the map in front of him, Leonard was a little annoyed. The plant radar should be turned on the way here. Leonard patted his forehead. In this way, it can be directly transplanted and brought along the way. What's the use of turning on the plant radar on the way back? It's probably dark after a few more trips. Be sure to remember it next time. Leonard reminded himself, sighed, cast a disillusionment spell on himself, and walked towards Hogwarts. Because the plant radar does not affect the field of vision and can still see a clear map, Leonard didn't turn it off, just staring at the map and walking towards Hogwarts. He planned to take a look at the magical plants along the way. Even if he couldn't transplant them, he would learn a lot. However, he has no hope of finding the kind of plant he wants, because if there is such a dangerous plant, it may have been disposed of long ago. Soon, Leonard encountered the first magical plant. This is a botruckle living with many botruckles. Introduced in thousands of miraculous herbs and mushrooms, it is a magical sorbus tree with a protective effect, so it is also called the guardian tree. This magical tree is the best tool for making wands. Under King Leonard's tree, he saw the emerald green shapes on the tree that looked like praying mantises to magical animals. The botruckle is the magical creature that accompanies this magical tree and is assigned DBBC for wandmakers looking for wand materials. These little things can help the magical trees clean up the pests, and they are beneficial creatures, but these little guys are not easy to mess with, and they are easily blinded by their sharp claws. These creatures belonging to the category of magical animals, Leonard can't guarantee that they will also have goodwill towards Leonard. But it doesn't matter, as long as they can't see themselves, even if they break the branches themselves, they won't be able to find them, right? But Leonard didn't want to destroy the plants. After all, he didn't plan to make a wand, so there was no need to break the branches. This kind of adult tree is too troublesome to transplant. All that Leonard is going to do is gather a little seed. The ripening time of the sorbet fruit is from July to August, and now it is considered ripe and about to rot. Seeds work best at this time. Leonard picked up a few ripe sorbet fruits under the tree, picked out the seeds from them, and then a black hole appeared near his hand and sucked the seeds in. Anything in the category of seeds can be stored in the magic seed bag, which is very convenient to use at any time. Saying goodbye to the botruckles who never found him, Leonard corrected his direction to make sure he was on the way back to Hogwarts, while observing the magical plants along the way. As Leonard judged before, there are not many magical plants in the Forbidden Forest, and most of them are useless. Sneezeweed, a material used to make delusion, is slightly poisonous. Two-ear grass, one of the materials for making invisible medicine, is non-toxic and harmless. There is also an unknown miraculous plant whose grass stems ooze emerald green liquid. Along the way Leonard saw many plants that did not meet his expectations, but he kept them in mind and planned to transplant these plants to the botanical garden the next time he came. Anyway, the long-term mission of the botanical garden does not require any magical plants to be planted, so Leonard will naturally not let go of any magical plants. Just stopping and going along the way, Leonard soon reached the outskirts of the Forbidden Forest. Hogwarts was ahead, and Leonard even saw a large green light spot in the greenhouse on the map, but it was a pity that it was a magical plant belonging to the school, and Leonard could not get it under normal circumstances. Leonard, who had opened the plant radar all the way, was about to turn off his talent, when he suddenly noticed a large green and dazzling green light spot on the edge of the map. This made Leonard, who was about to turn off the plant radar, stop in time. That's the location of Hogwarts. Leonard looked at the direction on the map curiously. That direction is not the greenhouse. The location of the greenhouse on the map is in the southeast corner of Hogwarts, and the extra area much larger than the greenhouse is clearly southwest of the castle, south of the auditorium. Where else in Hogwarts can there be so many magical plants besides the greenhouses? The point is that the distribution of these green dots is too wide. From the map, the auditorium is even covered by these green dots. What happened? It can't be that some magical plant crisis suddenly broke out and swallowed Hogwarts while he was in the Forbidden Forest, right? Impossible. With Dumbledore in there, how could this happen? Leonard thought wildly for a while, and ran towards Hogwarts. Whether it's the magical plant crisis or what the situation is, go and have a look first. Leonard hurried back to the castle, followed the corridor outside the castle to the auditorium. Outside the auditorium, 2 or 3 students passed by chatting and laughing, and it didn't look like anything serious had happened. Leonard walked into the auditorium. Some students used it as a self-study room, where they studied in peace. Some people used it as a lounge, playing chess and games. Anyway, it's business as usual here. Leonard searched in the auditorium suspiciously. On the map in front of him, he had already overlapped with the green dot representing the magical plant, but he never found anything unusual. This is strange. Leonard frowned slightly, and didn't even bother to pay attention to the gaze of Draco Malfoy, who was sitting at the long table in Slytherin. After confirming that the magical plant he was looking for was not in the auditorium, Leonard left the auditorium and walked around. On the roof, in the corners of the walls, and even in the cracks of the bricks, Leonard just took a closer look. It's not anywhere. Leonard leaned on the pillar at the door, looking into the distance. In fact, he stared at the plan map in front of him and studied it carefully. In the process of thinking, Leonard inexplicably thought of the ancient magical relics under Hogwarts. If you don't have it on your head or in front of your eyes, should you go underground? Leonard muttered and looked around. But from where? The auditorium doesn't seem like a secret room. If there is really something underground, the entrance is definitely not in the auditorium. Leonard looked towards the pier in the south, where freshmen had to go to enroll. A small road meandered up to the Minster. And beyond the path are not cliffs, but jagged but gentle rocky slopes. Because the terrain there is relatively complicated, few people pass by, and the undulating rocks can easily block the line of sight. If there is any mysterious entrance, it is the most suitable place. In the other direction, there is a long range of green light spots, and the extending direction is that side. Because the density is not as exaggerated as the auditorium, it was ignored by Leonard at the beginning. This is Leonard's analysis of normal situations. If the entrance is magical, such as an entrance like the Slytherin chamber, then his analysis is useless. But the underground of Hogwarts is really lively, full of things like secret rooms and holes. I suspect again that Hogwarts is actually floating on the ground, otherwise the ground full of pits would have been crushed by the huge castle long ago, right? What do you think this guy is looking for? Draco Malfoy hid behind the auditorium door, watching Leonard, and said to the followers behind her. I don't know. Gore answered very simply. He glanced at the auditorium behind him and muttered, I don't want to eat some snacks. Me too, Crabbe said. Just know how to eat, are you pigs? Draco Malfoy suddenly turned her head, staring at the two with a look of hatred. Another day of regretting having these 2 idiots as attendants. Don't you think this is an opportunity? See what this guy is looking for. Malfoy growled. But I don't think it really matters what he's looking for, and, Dotton. Crabbe recalled when they cornered Leonard. He was really scary when he hit people. At that time, Goyle and Malfoy had their lips pierced by their front teeth and didn't pay attention to Lun's beating. He saw it all. Marcus was punched and flew up, and his buck teeth fell out. He didn't want to be beaten. It's really worthless. A lowly mudblood scared you like this. Malfoy snorted coldly. Goyle, you and I lost. I don't dare, Goyle said in a low voice. Useless trash. The furious Malfoy jumped up and beat the 2 of them, and by the time he had vented his anger, Leonard had already walked down the path. If you don't go, I'll go. Malfoy saw Leonard's back fading away, gritted his teeth and chased after him. But in the middle of the run he ran back again. If I don't come back, remember to tell my dad that the mudblood killed me. Malfoy said resolutely. Before the frightened 2 could recover, Malfoy ran out of the auditorium after him. Leonard followed the path to the pier, looking forward to the rock wall below the auditorium. I can't see any caves or the like over there. He stepped on the jagged raised rocks and walked towards the green point. On the path, Malfoy, who was at least 100 meters away from Leonard, raised his head carefully. Malfoy scared himself enough. In his heart, Leonard had been demonized. He didn't dare to approach him at all. He could only carefully stare at Leonard from a distance. This distance is too far. Even Leonard can't feel that someone is staring at him from 100 meters away. Just like that, Leonard was looking for something on the rock wall with a tail that followed far away. Soon Leonard discovered a hidden deep cave in a raised position on both sides of the rock wall. There are two protrusions on both sides of the cave that are not known to be caused by magic or natural formation, which cover this place very well. The cave is so deep that the outside sun doesn't get in at all. Leonard stood outside the cave entrance, looked at the deep cave entrance, pondered the pros and cons in his mind, and finally decided to go in and take a look. There are many magical plants in this cave, and in such an environment, if there are no magical plants emitting poison all the time, then Leonard will not have any troubles. If there is such a plant that emits toxins all the time, it is estimated that it has been discovered long ago. So there shouldn't be much danger here for Leonard. So Leonard bravely held the magic spell that lit up the fluorescent process and walked towards the cave. I hope there will be a good harvest this time, Leonard muttered, and his figure disappeared into the depths of the cave. Not long after Leonard entered, Malfoy, who looked anxious, also came to the entrance of the cave. When he saw the cave with the huge mouth of the abyss that seemed to be opened by a monster, his heart flinched, but when he thought of Leonard walking in without hesitation, Malfoy, who refused to admit defeat, gritted his teeth. So go forward. It seems that because of the proximity to the Black Lake, there is plenty of water vapor in the cave, and there seems to be a layer of water mist in the air, making it uncomfortable to breathe. Leonard held up his wand, relying on a steady white light to illuminate his way forward, carefully paying attention to the movement in the cave. He seemed to hear the rustling sound like a snake crawling on the ground. Is there a snake in here? Leonard said to himself, his tone full of disappointment. If there is a snake, it means that the magical plants in this cave are not terrible. After all, it has not cleaned up the animals in the cave. Based on the denseness of the magical plants shown on the map, if these plants were a little dangerous, even snakes would not be able to live in groups. And what Leonard heard was like a dozen snakes squirming together. Just when Leonard was distressed, a black shadow suddenly retracted from the light range to darkness within the range of the fluorescent 053 spell. There is something. Leonard subconsciously increased the output of magic power, and suddenly the fluorescent spell became a continuous small searchlight, and the dazzling light dispelled a large area of darkness. At the same time, it also illuminates the dark tentacles wrapped around the wall and on the broken pillars. Seeing these tentacles, a term came to Leonard's mind. Devil's net. It turns out that there is no snake here, but the sound of the wriggling devil's net. The devil's net is a kind of magical plant that Hogwarts students should learn and understand when they are in the first grade. It is this kind of magical plant that is planted in Hogwarts No. 1 greenhouse. As the light spread, those devil's nets quickly retracted towards the two sides, revealing a trail. Couldn't this be full of devil internet cafes? Leonard said to himself, walking towards the depths of the cave. It may not be appropriate to say that it is a cave. Judging from some remaining bricks and stone pillars, this place seems to be a buried building. I just don't know what the building is for. Soon, Leonard noticed a beam of light shining from above in the depths of the underground building. He walked over and found a huge plant there. What the hell? Leonard couldn't help but swear when he saw the plant stretching its branches in the only beam of sunlight. It was a huge poisonous tentacles. Compared with the row of poisonous tentacles planted in Hogwarts greenhouse No. 4, this poisonous tentacles are almost the size of grandparents. Each of the poisonous tentacles cultivated in the greenhouse is placed in a flower pot. The height is no more than half a meter, and a leaf is no bigger than the palm of an adult. The poisonous tentacles in front of him are 2 meters high, and the leaves are as big as Leonard's upper body. Is this a talent, or is it because you are old enough? Leonard looked at the poisonous tentacles with bright eyes, wishing he could take the poisonous tentacles away immediately. Just looking at the size, this poisonous tentacle is not much smaller than the guardian tree Leonard saw, but the status of the two is not the same. Although they are all magical plants, high-value and aggressive magical plants like poisonous tentacles are more in line with Leonard's needs. This is a good thing that must be taken away by all means. To put it simply, in Leonard's heart, the value of the Dharma tree is unknown. Leonard put in the effort to take it away, but this poisonous tentacles are worth it. Go back to the dormitory first. I remember that I brought a suitcase with the no trace extending curse. Although the environment inside is not very good, it should be no problem to transplant plants in a short period of time. Leonard turned around excitedly and was about to leave when suddenly he heard the screams of a child coming from the road. And the voice seemed familiar. Leonard's face darkened. With such a large poisonous tentacles, it will take a little effort for him to get rid of them. If this process is discovered, this dangerous plant will definitely be taken away by the school instead of falling into the hands of any student. Then this student who found this place and encountered danger. Regardless of whether the student escaped by chance or died here, it will be found here, and if Leonard intends to transplant the poisonous tentacles, it will inevitably leave traces. However, there are already some seeds that can be used on this giant poisonous tentacle. Leonard can pick those seeds and use super growth to create a poisonous tentacle that is about to wither. In this way, he can cover up the fact that he took away this precious poisonous tentacles. The only question now is who is this student in danger in the cave? Let's go and see who it is first. If it's someone we know and have a good relationship, let him leave first. If Leonard recalled occasionally looking at him while wandering around the auditorium. This cerebral palsy thing can't follow him to find it. Then he should be kicked. Leonard extinguished the fluorescent spell, closed his eyes and adapted to the darkness for a while. The ancient buds on his cuffs shook, and opened his magic vision. The surrounding darkness is replaced by the color blocks of magic power. The wriggling devil net has dim green fluorescence, and the magic power floating in the air presents a faint tulle-like gorgeous color. But the ground without magic power and the raised rocks are cold black. Under the influence of magic vision, Leonard gained a clearer and clearer vision than night vision. Leonard stretched out his hand, and gently stroked the devil's net on the wall. "Take me out," Leonard said softly. Even the devil's net that was not planted by Leonard is happy to obey Leonard's orders. The wriggling devil's net gathered under Leonard's feet, lifted him up and transported him out of the cave at a constant speed. The scream became more and more clear. Leonard looked coldly at the direction the sound came from. If it's a spoiled kid who has nothing to do, let him be here. This place is quite suitable as his tomb. It will not expose Leonard's own secrets, and this ancient place has nothing to do with him. No one will know whether Delica Malfoy's death has anything to do with him. In the cave, Leonard stood on the wriggling devil's net and moved slowly. There was no sound of footsteps, only the sound of the devil's net rubbing against the ground, which sounded like countless snakes crawling. This leaves Leonard virtually unnoticed in the dark. Soon at the edge of the cave, Leonard saw a human figure who was entangled in a devil's net and struggling desperately, and the scream came from inside. The sunlight outside the cave was dim, so Leonard could already see some things clearly. He closed his magic vision, and saw Slytherin's green-trimmed black robe uniform and pale gold hair through the gaps entangled in the devil's net. Listening to the hog-like screams that sounded clearer without cave recollections, Leonard had already determined that this was Delica Malfoy. But why is it just Malfoy? What about his two minions? Malfoy's two followers don't say that they are inseparable from Malfoy, but they are always together in general. And Leonard had actually noticed Malfoy and his two minions in the auditorium. But they are not here now. Did they escape, or did they not come down at all? If they don't come down, do they know that Delica Malfoy is following him? An impatient expression appeared on Leonard's face. People who act in teams are the most annoying. You don't know when they will get together or know each other's whereabouts. This made Leonard feel passive. Anyway, if you have doubts, you need to confirm it, but Malfoy can't die before it is really confirmed. Seeing that the devil's net was struggling less and less, and the sound coming from inside was also getting smaller and smaller, Leonard patted the devil's net to loosen them. The devil's net loosened obediently, which gave Malfoy, who was on the verge of death, a chance to breathe. Since it is unclear exactly under what circumstances Malfoy's two followers were not entangled in the devil's net, Leonard's time is tight. He told Malfoy not to let go of the devil's net no matter what the situation was, and broke Malfoy's wand on the ground with his foot, and then cleaned up the footprints on it to ensure that even if he got out of the bondage by chance, he could not use the fluorescent spell to dispel the devil net. It can only be said that Malfoy is the real dish. Professor Sprout would definitely talk about the habit of the devil's net in class, but it seems that the young master didn't listen to it at all. He really deserves to be pestered. Leonard quickly ran out of the cave and followed the path back to the auditorium. Before returning to the dormitory to pick up the box, Leonard had to check the status of Malfoy's servant. But before entering the auditorium, Leonard noticed the two round figures. They stared at the path, as if waiting for someone. However, there was no panic on the faces of the two of them, and the clothes on their bodies were fairly neat. It seemed that they were not persecuted by the devil's net. So in other words, they didn't fall and crawl away under the attack of the devil's net, but they didn't go down with Malfoy at all. This means that Leonard has more time. Leonard bypassed the path, quickly returned to the dormitory, took the suitcase with the traceless extension spell, and quietly went to the cave while avoiding the sight of the two followers. Malfoy was still tightly wrapped by the devil's net, but under Leonard's urging, the devil's net did not kill him, otherwise Malfoy's sternum would have been crushed at this time. "You're lucky," Leonard said silently, and came down to the end of the cave surrounded by the devil's net. He approached the huge poisonous tentacles, picked some seeds from the swimming tentacles, and then he stepped back 2 steps to clean up any time and dirt with the floating spell. Soon the soil under the poisonous tentacles was removed, and a large pit was dug to completely expose the roots of the poisonous tentacles. Leonard checked it carefully, and after confirming that there was nothing missing, he opened the suitcase and covered the poisonous tentacles in from above. The huge poisonous tentacles seemed to be sucked into a black hole after being covered by the box, and the branches and trees were twisted into a ball and finally stuffed into the box. When the box fell to the ground, Leonard flipped it over and closed it, and a huge poisonous tentacle weighing at least several hundred pounds was just packed into the suitcase and could be taken away at any time. Phew, Leonard heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that there was no accident with the traceless extension spell, and then picked up a seed to activate super speed growth and strengthen the root system, and threw it into the pit. If this poisonous tentacle has the gigantic quality, then this seed should directly grow a huge poisonous tentacle. If there is no jauntization trait, then Leonard needs to take a gamble to see if the optimized growth can bet on a jauntization enhancement. If not, Leonard will need to consider setting fire to burn this place down. Fortunately, the giant poisonous tentacles did not disappoint Leonard. The super-growing seeds grew a huge poisonous tentacles in the blink of an eye, waving the tentacles to show their strength. Under Leonard's order, this temporary giant poisonous tentacle buried the earth and rocks around it under itself, and quickly eliminated the suspicious traces. After doing all this, Leonard once again used hypergrowth on the poisonous tentacles. The huge poisonous tentacles shook the tentacles quickly, and a dead pale yellow appeared from the tip of its leaves and quickly spread to the whole body of the poisonous tentacles like a plague. Soon a vibrant giant poisonous tentacle lost its life in a short period of time, and became a withered plant whose original state could be vaguely seen. Leonard thought for a while, then took a few seeds from the giant poisonous tentacles and put them in his pocket. The seeds of this kind of hypergrowth are actually defective products, and these seeds are only used to dispel the doubts of others. He has a whole plant of giant poisonous tentacles full of seeds. Then he took some of the seeds from the devil's net beside him and took them with him, and put a lot of seeds into the seed bag. After finishing all this, Leonard picked up the suitcase, passed by the fainted Malfoy again, and used a powerful illusion spell on the outside of the leather suitcase that had been casted with the traceless extension spell to find a hidden corner of the suitcase that eliminated the figure. Hid. After doing all this, he returned to cave, and let Malfoy out with a look of disgust. Without the shackles of the devil's net, Malfoy fell headlong to the ground. Not sure if it was because of overshock or lack of oxygen, he still didn't wake up even after being dropped. What a waste, he's good at cooking and loves to play. Leonard curled his lips, grabbed Malfoy's robes with a look of disgust, lifted him up like a garbage bag, and threw him in the direction of the auditorium. Soon, the figures of the two appeared in front of Malfoy's followers. Goyle, who was nibbling on a custard biscuit, first noticed Leonard's figure. When he saw a man in a Slytherin robe walking up, the biscuit in his hand fell to the ground in shock. Malfoy. Wilhelm of Hufflepuff killed Malfoy. Goyle screamed and ran away, losing his mind. Unable to react, Crabbe stared blankly at the back of Goyle running away, turned his head and saw the scene of Leonard carrying Malfoy, and then recalled Goyle's yelling when he ran away, and suddenly panicked. At this time, Leonard looked at Crabbe and said, "You came just in time, Don't kill me. I don't know anything." Crabbe yelled in horror, and ran away after chasing Goyle's back. Leonard, who mentioned Malfoy, was planning to ask Crabbe to send Malfoy to the school hospital. What's wrong? Chapter 101. Seriously, if it wasn't for the one in his hand, Leonard really wanted to catch up and tell this stupid follower what it means to be irritable. It's a pity that with Malfoy in hand, there were some curious students around who were attracted by the screams, so Leonard didn't make such an easily misunderstood behavior. Leonard looked melancholy at the backs of the two running away, sighed, and threw Malfoy aside under the watchful eyes of the students who came to watch one after another. Oops. Malfoy, who hadn't woken up all this time, came to his senses after the fall, but he was so sore that he couldn't stand up at all, and could only lie on the ground writhing like a maggot. What's wrong with me? Why is my body hurting so much? Where am I? Why am I falling to the ground? Malfoy, who was not so clear-headed due to lack of oxygen, looked dazed until he saw Leonard's expressionless face, and his body trembled involuntarily. "Yo, Master Malfoy is awake," Leonard said with an exaggerated tone on his cold face. "How is it? Are you satisfied with the massage from Devil's Net?" Leonard's words awakened Draco Malfoy's memory, and the Devil's Net that flooded in like a tide almost became Malfoy's nightmare. "Ah!" Malfoy cried out in pain, with a cry in his voice. "Crying again? You are really crying? Is this the glory of the Malfoy family?" Leonard stood aside and said sarcastic remarks, seeing several teachers running towards this direction under the leadership of Goyle and Crabbe. Malfoy didn't see this scene because of the perspective, he only heard Leonard mocking him. So the pampered Malfoy endured the pain, got up and hit Leonard's knee. Leonard lowered his head expressionlessly, glanced at Malfoy who was hitting his knee trying to laugh himself to death, and curled his lips. "Here, Leonard Wilhelm killed Malfoy." Goyle yelled loudly. "He's trying to kill us too," yelled Crabbe, who followed. The professors were serious, although they didn't quite believe that one student would kill another student, but the deans of the 4 colleges came to report the situation to the students. There was also a professor of defense against the dark arts who didn't know whether he was passing by or came to watch the fun. It's just that when the professors rushed to the scene, they only saw Malfoy getting up and hitting Leonard's knee. "Is this what you said Mr. Malfoy was dead?" Professor McGonagall fixed Crabbe and Goyle sternly. Although professors will gather because they value the situation of students, it does not mean that they can be fooled by students with such an excuse. This behavior definitely does not pay dividends. "Mr. Crabbe, Mr. Goyle, I'll give Slytherin 50 points for deceiving the professor by both of you." Professor McGonagall was angry. Snape glanced at Malfoy, who was covered in dust and lying on the ground in a mess, with a flash of anger in his eyes. Professor McGonagall should not punish Mr. Gower and Mr. Crabbe for the time being. Perhaps Mr. Wilhelm did something misleading to make them think that Mr. Malfoy had suffered misfortune. Snape looked at Leonard with a mocking expression. It seems that Mr. Wilhelm used violence against Mr. Malfoy to cause this situation. Leonard glanced at Snape disdainfully, but said nothing. Professor McGonagall subconsciously frowned at Snape's words. Snape's behavior style is obvious to all. Loyalty is due to being a colleague and maintaining wiping in front of the students, so it is not easy to blame the other party's history of wanton point deductions. From Professor McGonagall's point of view, it is very likely that Malfoy was responsible for today's incident. There are 3 students in Slytherin, and Crabbe and Goyle are not injured at all. If there is no evidence, Professor McGonagall even speculates whether this is the case. The 3 agreed to frame Leonard. No, how can you make random guesses without evidence? Professor McGonagall calmed down, looked carefully at the dusty Malfoy, and asked, "Then who can tell us what happened?" "What happened?" The ashamed and angry Malfoy raised his head blankly to recall. He remembered that he was following Leonard. What happened after that? Upon seeing this, Snape asked, "Mr. Malfoy, did Mr. Wilhelm do something to you?" This is no longer a hint, this is simply a blatant inducement to Malfoy. Malfoy froze for a moment, and he immediately understood what Snape meant with his stomach full of bad water, and planned to think of a reason. "That's right, Leonard, he hit me." Professor McGonagall looked at Snape dissatisfied, and felt that he needed to talk to Snape. "Oh, wait a minute." Before Malfoy could figure out how to arrange Leonard, Professor Sprouter, who was already beside him, spoke up. She walked to Malfoy's side, removed a blade from Malfoy's body, and checked the wound on Malfoy's body again. This is the wound caused by the Devil's Net, Professor Sprout said firmly. Devil's Net? I don't think there is any magic that can cause wounds like the Devil's Net. Professor Flitwick stood up. I think Mr. Malfoy should have been attacked by the Devil's Net somewhere. It seems that he didn't attend class well. I remember that Devil's Web was a magical plant that was very easy to drive away, learned in first grade. That's right, Professor Flitwick. Professor Sprout looked at Malfoy and sighed with disappointment on his face. It seems that Mr. Malfoy didn't pay attention to the class when he was in class. But that doesn't mean anything. Maybe Mr. Wilhelm is up to some trick. Snape was aggressive. Professor, I think you can ask the person involved and the students around. Leonard smiled and said, we're all still standing here, and it's a pig talking, isn't it? That's right. Professor Sprout nodded. Mr. Crabbe, Mr. Gower, what did you say that Mr. Wilhelm killed Mr. Malfoy? What happened before? What did you see again? Goyle and Crabbe looked at each other with panic on their faces. Is this something that can't be said? Professor McGonagall pressed. I don't want to hear lies. Yes, it was Malfoy. He saw that Leonard seemed to be looking for something, and he said he wanted to follow him to have a look. Goyle said. Before he left, he told us that if something happened to him, it would be Leonard Wilhelm, Crabbe added. It turned out to be like this. Leonard thanked himself for being cautious. Fortunately, he thought a little more and didn't kill Malfoy directly, otherwise he would definitely be discovered. And then, asked Professor Flitwick, what did you see afterwards? We saw Leonard Wilhelm grabbing Malfoy's clothes and pulling him up. We thought he had killed Malfoy, and we were very scared. Goyle lowered his head and said in a low voice. Stupid, cried Professor McGonagall. How could you have such a stupid idea? If Mr. Wilhelm really killed Mr. Malfoy, why did he bring him in front of so many people? Your statement is untenable. Professor Flitwick shook his head and gave Snape a complicated look. Snape's face darkened, and he understood Professor Flitwick's look, which was sympathy for having two such stupid people in his house. So Mr. Leonard, can you tell us what happened after Mr. Malfoy left with you? Professor McGonagall looked at Leonard with a still stern expression, but his tone softened a lot. Actually, I found a cave over there. Leonard pointed in the direction he came from. I'm a little curious about the facade, so I plan to go in and explore. Oh, this behavior doesn't look like Hufflepuff at all, it looks like Gryffindor. Professor Flitwick said. This is very dangerous. Mr. Wilhelm had better inform the professor about unknown things. Of course, he glanced at Goyle and Crabbe. It's better to be more precise, and don't make a mistake. Since we've already explored it, we won't say such things. Professor Sprouter waved his hand, and asked kindly, Leonard, did you find the Devil's Net inside? That's right, there is a huge Devil's Net, which almost fills the cave, but I remember the professor said in class that the Devil's Net hates light, so I used the fluorescent spell to make them avoid it. Well done, Leonard, you are very talented. Professor Sprout praised. And then, what's in it? There is another large poisonous tentacles inside, but it seems to have been dead for a while. Leonard replied, honestly. Poison tentacles, how big? Asked Professor Sprout. 2 or 3 are as tall as me. Leonard roughly gestured. Really? Professor Sprout's eyes lit up, obviously interested. Quick, take us to have a look. Such a large poisonous tentacles obviously belong to Rare's magic plant, and Professor DBAG Proud didn't want to let it go. Pomona, our focus is on Mr. Malfoy's injury, Professor McGonagall reminded. I'm sure it's the Devil's Net, and then we just need to find the cave that Leonard mentioned. Professor Sprout said nonchalantly, as for Mr. Malfoy, please ask Professor Snape to take him to the school hospital. After all, the internet doesn't even have any poison, so it's easy to save and heal. Professor Sprout said with a stern face, but I hope Mr. Malfoy can concentrate a little more in class in the future, otherwise he won't know that Devil's Web is afraid of light. Oh, Pomona, relax, he's just a kid. Professor Flitwick said. Let's go and see that cave together. Although Mr. Wilhelm has explored it, we still have to be careful, maybe there is something hidden there. Danger. That's right. Professor Sprout nodded approvingly. Then let's go. Professor McGonagall, Professor Sprout, and Professor Flitwick walked towards the cave under the leadership of Leonard, while Snape stood where he was, his face as black as the bottom of a pot. Goyle, Crabbe, confinement for a week. Snape said this almost through gritted teeth. Crabbe remained silent, not even daring to say what he always refuted. What are you waiting for? Get Mr. Malfoy up and take him to the school hospital. Snape growled. Yes. Two frightened Slytherin students who looked like quail lifted Malfoy, who was sore all over, and ran towards the school hospital at full speed, ignoring Malfoy's screams like killing a pig. Even the students of Slytherin were afraid of Snape's grim expression all the time, not to mention the mistake they had just made. Snape looked at the fleeing figure of the two carrying Malfoy, snorted coldly, shook his pitch-black cloak, and followed behind. The thought that this farce was actually caused by his own students made Snape feel annoyed. The professors dispersed, and the onlookers left one by one, leaving only the figure of a Defense Against the Dark Arts professor standing in place. Quirrell, looking at Snape leaving, asked in his mind, "Master, are you here to observe Snape?" "No," the hoarse voice echoed in Quirrell's head, "I just heard that a Malfoy died, so I wanted to take a look, but I only saw a farce." He paused and said, "I can't imagine that the current Slytherin is so disgraceful. How can there be such stupid people there?" Malfoy. "Master, do you hate the Malfoy family?" "I can." Quirrell expressed his loyalty eagerly. "Shut up," Voldemort said coldly. "I said, don't make up your own mind." The cold scolding reminded Quirrell of the torture he often suffered, and immediately said in a cold sweat, "Yes. The Malfoy family. Lucius Malfoy was my reliable servant in my prime." Voldemort said, "He is capable and rich, and he can provide a lot of money to my career. Help." "Then Master, why don't we go to him?" Quirrell asked. "Do you think he is as stupid as you are?" Voldemort mocked. "I know my servant too well. If that guy sees me so weak, he will betray me without hesitation. I know him, or I know the character of these guys." Is he not loyal to you?" Although Quirrell was a little bit reconciled to Voldemort's sarcasm, he didn't dare to resist. A person who completely controls his life doesn't mean what he says. HMPH. He is only loyal to power. Voldemort snorted coldly. "The people who are really loyal to me are all in Azkaban." "No, Master and I," Quirrell said hastily. Yes, and you." Voldemort let out an inexplicable laugh. "However, if you don't make a decision, then my only free servant will soon die with me." Quirrell shuddered. But the Master, the unicorn." Quirrell's voice trembled. "Yes, that's right. The blood of unicorns is cursed, but you have to know that in front of the Philosopher's Stone immortality potion, these are nothing. All you need to do is to live until then." Voldemort bewitched. "Your body won't last long, you have no choice, understand?" Under the leadership of Leonard, several professors quickly found the delicate hole. "No wonder we haven't found this place. Unless we come here specially, it's really not easy to find," Professor Sprout said, looking at the raised rock beside the cave entrance. "I also discovered it by accident, because I heard that there are many hidden secret passages in Hogwarts Castle. I was curious and looked around." Leonard found a reason. "Shouldn't secret passages be found inside the castle? What are you doing outside?" Professor McGonagall questioned. "Because I didn't find it. I feel that those secret passages may need specific spells, so I plan to look around and try to find the exit of the secret passages," Leonard said calmly. He had thought up this excuse on the way here. It was reasonable and impossible to be exposed. After hearing this, Professor McGonagall really didn't pursue it anymore, and walked in with the bright wand and several professors. Soon, the professors discovered the devil's net in the cave. It's hard not to notice it, but under the illumination of the fluorescent spell, the sound of their wriggling is very obvious. "I didn't expect the number to be so large." Professor Sprout glanced at the devil's nets and shook his head. "They're all young guys, there's nothing special about them." "Look what I've found," Professor Flitwick yelled. I saw Professor Flitwick bent down and picked up a broken wand from the ground. "This is probably Mr. Malfoy's wand, but he is broken." Professor McGonagall looked at the broken wand, found no suspicious traces, and said, "Take it first, and return it to Mr. Malfoy when you return to school. It's really disappointing. Mr. Malfoy didn't play to the level that a wizard should have at all. He even lost his wand." Professor Flitwick sighed. "This shows that he didn't focus on his studies." It seems that we need to pay more attention to Mr. Malfoy. Professor McGonagall said, let's go ahead and have a look. There are still a lot of things we need to do in the school. Parents must be notified if a student is injured, and she knows who Lucius Malfoy is. However, as the vice principal of Hogwarts and a recognized master of the Transfiguration curse, she wasn't worried that Lucius Malfoy would find any trouble at all. Speaking of a bunch of things, well, did Dumbledore ask you to prepare? Probably because the professors rarely got together, Professor Flitwick couldn't help but say something. He lowered his voice deliberately, as if trying to avoid Leonard's. After hearing that, Professor McGonagall glanced at Leonard, and said to Flitwick, keep your voice down, this is not something that can be advertised. I just think it's a little strange. It's obviously a magic that protects something, so it shouldn't be too powerful. Professor Flitwick sighed. I think something so interesting should really be spiced up more. Professor Sprout squinted at Professor Flitwick. Your magic is already very dangerous. No, I think yours is too simple. Professor Flitwick retorted. Each professor looked helplessly at the two arguing, and looked at the dazed and ignorant Leonard, and heaved a sigh of relief. It appears that Mr. Wilhelm has no idea what they're talking about. How could you not know? Leonard pretended not to know anything, but he understood what the professors were talking about when he heard Professor Flitwick's first sentence. It's the level that guards the Philosopher's Stone. From the few words of the professors, Leonard also found some key points. For example, at the request of Dumbledore, the level difficulty of guarding the Sorcerer's Stone was deliberately reduced. It can be seen from the original book or the movie that those things are not so much a level, but an interesting level-breaking game. Another one is that it's not that the professors don't know what the checkpoints they set up between each other are. In fact, there is only one Quirrell who doesn't know. Only Quirrell needs to inquire about it to know what checkpoints other professors have set. The professors and principals of the whole school are actually playing him. Isn't that normal? Who would leave the most suspicious person unguarded and turn on their own? When professors set up levels, they normally see the levels of other professors. Only Quirrell, the troll level set by this guy, is not even put into those levels, and eventually he throws it out and consumes it. The attitude of Dumbledore and the other professors was obvious. They were only paying lip service to Quirrell, but in fact he was still excluded. Light the wax for Professor Quirrell, who has never been able to integrate into the workplace. The professors talked in a low voice, and after a while, they reached the depths of the cave, and saw the dead circle poisonous tentacles left by Leonard. When seeing the poisonous tentacles, Professor Sprout was pleasantly surprised and heartbroken. Merlin's beard, this is the biggest poisonous tentacle I've ever seen, but it's a pity that it died. Professor Sprout sighed, reaching out his hand to touch the branch of the poisonous tentacle. The time of death is not too long, that is, in recent years. Professor Flitwick checked and said, don't be too sorry, maybe it can be cultivated through seeds. Professor McGonagall said and looked up at the branches of the poisonous tentacles. Yes, as long as there are seeds, I can definitely grow this kind of giant poisonous tentacles. Professor Sprout said confidently, and looked up at the branches of the poisonous tentacles. There are indeed many seeds on the branches, but there are also obvious signs of picking. What's wrong? Why aren't you talking? Professor Flitwick raised his head. And saw nothing. I'm a little irritable. Why is he so short? Mr. Wilhelm. Professor McGonagall looked at Leonard seriously. Do you understand poisonous tentacles? Ah, that's okay. Leonard put on a guilty look, and avoided looking at Professor McGonagall. Leonard, take out the seeds. Professor Sprout sighed. That thing is dangerous, and it's a prohibited product. I know you like magical plants, but it's really not safe to take things. Leonard was hesitant, but finally obediently took out a few seeds of poisonous tentacles and a few seeds of devil's net in his pocket. Good boy. Professor Sprouter nodded gratifiedly to Leonard and turned to Professor McGonagall. Minerva, I think Leonard's performance deserves a reward. After all, he saved his classmate from the devil's net. Quote, this is really good, and it should be rewarded. Professor Flitwick also said in support. I also really intend to. Professor McGonagall nodded and said, Mr. Wilhelm, in view of your performance, I think I will grant you a special contribution award in recognition of your behavior of helping classmates regardless of past suspicions. Special contribution award. Leonard froze for a moment. How much does that thing have a hammer for? Hogwarts Special Contribution Award. You say it is useless, it really has a trophy in the showroom. But you say it works. Almost no one can see this trophy except the students who are locked up and punished for cleaning the showroom. It's outrageous. The only practical value of this Special Contribution Award may be to add 100 points to the recipient's college. But the problem is that the Academy Cup in recent years seems to belong to Gryffindor, and he has to share a hammer. And also took the seeds from himself. Well, although those seeds were originally used to deal with the professors, because they are seeds that optimize growth and output, even if they grow anything, they will be a little malnourished. Although he kept complaining in his heart, Leonard still showed an expression of great surprise on the surface, and then he was sent away with the encouragement of several professors. Okay, let's clean up here. After watching Leonard leave, Professor McGonagall looked at the cave and said, "Such a dangerous place can't be allowed to exist forever." Several professors teamed up to use magic to burn all the devil's nets in the cave, and then Professor McGonagall used deformation to make rocks grow and block the entrance of the cave. Black smoke rose faintly and drifted in the air. Leonard stood in the distance with his suitcase, looked regretfully at the hole where the black smoke was coming out, and turned to leave. There is no time to sigh. The giant poisonous tentacles in the box must be disposed of as soon as possible. In case Leonard dies in the box, Leonard will cry to death. Because he rushed to the botanical garden in a hurry, Leonard did not stop to transplant the magical plants. After rushing to the botanical garden, Leonard used the floating spell to create a pothole in the center of the botanical garden. He opened the suitcase and removed the giant poisonous tentacles inside, moved to the pit. Then he added a root system to help the giant poisonous tentacles take root, and then filled the hole. So this giant poisonous tentacle belongs to Leonard. And this is a mature, huge poisonous tentacle that can be used for the conservation work of the botanical garden. You have obtained a mutated magical plant, a giant poisonous tentacles. You have obtained 300 experience points, and are currently a senior plant apprentice, 631 700ths. Variation plant. Giant poisonous tentacles, lifespan has been greatly enhanced. Closing square bracket. You have planted a brand new plant. You have gained 20 points of experience, and the current 5/5 has reached the first quantity achievement. You have gained 1 point of strengthening point. Current botanical garden plant species, 5/10. Current advanced plant apprentice, 651 700ths. Phew, that's great, finally there's something at the bottom of the box. Leonard watched the giant poisonous tentacles come alive and wiped the sweat from his head. Because he was in a hurry, he basically ran all the way here. Fortunately, there was no danger on the way. The next step is to use these seeds. Leonard carefully pushed aside the dancing tentacles of the poisonous tentacles with his hands, picked a lot of seeds from the plants, and planted them next to the giant poisonous tentacles. Leonard reserved enough space to prevent these poisonous tentacles from covering each other's living space after growing up. After planting a mass of poisonous tentacles, Leonard returned to the giant. Before the tentacles. Next, it's time to strengthen this giant poisonous tentacle, because it is mainly used to protect the botanical garden, so Leonard does not intend to let this giant poisonous tentacle produce unenhanced seeds. The optimized growth was activated, and Leonard saw 3 pictures in the dancing tentacles of the giant poisonous tentacles. In the first picture, the sharp-toothed leaves of the giant poisonous tentacles closed in pairs, and dense holes appeared in the middle. When an enemy approached, these holes sprayed out a large amount of poisonous mist, and the enemy struggled a few times in the poisonous mist before falling to the ground with purple all over. This is to add an offensive method to the poisonous tentacles, but the distance is too close to make much sense. In the second picture, it also develops into the appearance of 2 leaves closing together, but there are no dense holes inside, but a thin tube with sharp thorns. When the enemy approached within 20 meters of the poisonous tentacles exploded violently, ejecting spikes glowing with purple light. These spikes are very sharp and strong, and can easily pierce rocks, and they are powerful, not small. The enemy was pierced by the sharp thorns, and died under the effect of the poison before he could struggle. It was also a highly poisonous attack, but the attack range of this poisonous tentacle made Leonard's eyes shine. Isn't this the long-range attack method he has been thinking about? Compared with the strengthening node ability sharing that will be unlocked in the future, which can only use magic 3 times, this conventional long-distance attack method is better. Immediately following the third picture, In this picture, the highly poisonous tentacles of the poisonous tentacles have been strengthened, and the extension range has reached an astonishing 30 meters, but the farther the distance is, the weaker the tentacles of the poisonous tentacles are. In Leonard's opinion, it is not as good as the second reinforcement. So the enhanced content is so easily determined. Strengthen. With Leonard's identification, the shape of the giant poisonous tentacles changed dramatically. The leaves combined and closed, and the thin tubes and spikes grew. Soon a poisonous tentacles that sprayed highly poisonous spikes appeared in front of Leonard. You have strengthened the giant poisonous tentacles, resulting in beneficial mutations, and you have gained 300 experience points. The current junior botanist 251 1/1000ths. You have obtained 1 strengthening point. You have obtained the talent, characteristic enhancement. Because the giant poisonous tentacles are mutated magical plants, your reinforcement will be enhanced. The effective range of the giant poisonous tentacles will increase by 20 meters, and the speed of the projectile will increase to 300 kilometers per hour. With the strengthening of the giant poisonous tentacles, Leonard's level has also been improved, but the unexpected joy is that the vehicle poisonous tentacles, which are transformed into plants, have also enhanced the strengthening effect. If the range is increased by 20 meters, the effective range will reach an astonishing 40 meters 2.9, which is far beyond the effective casting distance of ordinary wizards. Moreover, Leonard's botanical garden is only more than 40 meters long, and the attack range of the giant poisonous tentacles in the middle has covered the entire botanical garden. Coupled with the surrounding bitter thorns that have not yet grown up, Leonard's botanical garden protection measures have basically taken shape. There is also a talent to enhance the characteristics. Leonard couldn't wait to click on the system to see his new talent. Characteristic enhancement. For the strengthened plants, the enhanced ability can be additionally strengthened in the direction of characteristics. Closing square bracket. Another chance to strengthen. Although it is only an enhancement of fixed characteristics, it also means that the plants in Leonard's hand can be enhanced again, and the ability will become stronger. If he just read the introduction, Leonard felt that his understanding was still a little vague. So he planned to try to see how much the characteristic enhancement would affect Leonard's plants. Leaving the botanical garden along the thorny path, Leonard planned to inspect it as usual before leaving to find opportunities for experiments. This inspection really made Leonard find something different. Leonard squatted down, staring at the large footprints of beasts on the ground, lost in thought. These are not the traces of passing by, but the messy footprints left by wild beasts. After repeated trampling, Leonard can't tell the appearance of the footprints, let alone what kind of animal it is. Is there anything that wants to be in his botanical garden? Leonard found the edge of the thorns near the footprints, and sure enough, there were still some black hairs left on the withered thorns full of spikes, and some of the spikes were still stained with blood. This is the result of wanting to break through by force and being educated by thorns. The remains of the bitter brambles that made up Leonard's arboretum fence were the strongest things Leonard had in his hands. When growing at a super high speed, its root system extends outward at the same time, devouring a large amount of nutrients and water, making the nearby land rigid, combining with the withered root system to form a structure stronger than concrete. This makes it impossible for the plants on the surface to be moved, and the sharp thorns and thorns that are as strong as steel will educate those beasts that want to break in. When Leonard designed the thorny layout, he set up a path structure that can only be seen from a specific angle through a perspective higher than that of the beast. From other angles, the dense thorns and thorns in the past will cover up the original path. Moreover, there is not only one bare entrance in this circle of thorns, but the only real entrance mixed in among countless false entrances leading to dead ends. It can be said that Leonard, no living thing can walk into the botanical garden normally. Although the owners of these footprints seem to have not entered the botanical garden, they need to pay a little attention. If it is a magical animal that is more cherished, in case it breaks in by accident, he must find it in time. Otherwise, it would be too bad. Living magical animals can be sold for a lot of money. But there shouldn't be any plants in the botanical garden that would attract magical animals, right? Leonard looked at the nearby traces suspiciously, and could see the perseverance of the owner of the footprints. But now in the botanical garden, there are bitter thorn bushes that are active in the young stage, and there are giant poisonous tentacles that can attack the entire botanical garden with a wide attack range, so there is no need to worry too much about safety. Leonard got up and was about to leave when he suddenly noticed a sight not far away. Something was staring at him, but it didn't feel human, and there were no complicated emotions in the eyes. Leonard turned his head to look over, and found a white and glowing horse looking at him curiously not far away. White to glowing horses. Leonard's thoughts froze for a moment, until the horse shook his head, and Leonard saw a silver horn through the gap between the branches. It turned out to be a unicorn. Unicorns are docile, curious, sensitive to evil and malice, and very brave. When in danger, the unicorn will take the initiative to attack, and use its unicorn and front hooves to give the enemy a chill and a big mouth. Don't underestimate this beautiful and pure creature. They have a strong physique and are full of magic power. These magic powers strengthen its body, making its running speed, strength, and magic resistance all frighteningly high. Not even the unforgivable curse, filled with evil thoughts, could kill it all at once. Leonard recalled what he saw in the book, and he had a clear understanding in his mind. But he understands that unicorns are not creatures peeping at his botanical garden, and there are no black-haired unicorns in this world. But is the unicorn looking at him? What is it trying to do? Don't Leonard think that if he doesn't do anything, he will cause the unicorn to attack, and that's its curiosity. Looking at the glossy silvery hair, Leonard had the urge to touch it. I feel that the fur of the unicorn is very raw. As if sensing Leonard's aggressive gaze, the unicorn Way Blue had a look of disgust in his eyes, backed away twice, and then jumped away. Seeing the unicorn fleeing like a forest elf, Leonard rubbed his hands regretfully. In the future, if you have a chance, you must rue a unicorn hair. The unicorn was about to run away, and Leonard left the botanical garden with his suitcase in regret, walking along his usual route. Leonard remembered being close to a lair of mountain trolls on this route. Although the troll is very smelly, it is not impossible to deal with if you stay away. Leonard intends to use the magical plant seeds on his body to experience the effect of characteristic enhancement. Soon, Leonard came near the territory of the mountain troll, and before he got close, he smelled a terrible smell of fermenting cesspit. There was an open space cleared out by the monsters. Except for the cave in the middle, broken animal bones and a lot of feces can be seen everywhere. The harsh environment is simply a picture scroll of hell. Leonard held his nose, looked up and saw the giant monster lying in the hole sleeping, exposing most of its body and screaming loudly. Actually sleeping, but fortunately sleeping. Leonard held his nose and breathed a sigh of relief. In this case, with the ability of the plant in his hand, maybe he can choose the distance and draw the kugwai to solve it. This way you don't have to be contaminated with the stink of trolls. The black hole opens and drops a seed. This is the seed of giant poisonous tentacles. Leonard intends to use long-range attacks to confirm the effect of characteristic enhancement. Visually measuring the distance, Leonard noticed that there was a distance of about 60 meters from his current position to the location of the troll. Because the strengthening of the giant poisonous tentacles comes with an attack range of 40 meters, Leonard specially opened the distance to confirm the attack distance of the giant poisonous tentacles after their characteristics have been strengthened. Optimized growth, long-distance attack enhancement, characteristic enhancement, and super speed growth. At the moment of the strengthening effect, a seed fell into the soil, instantly split into 3 and ejected towards the 2 sides, and then took root on the ground. Immediately afterwards, 3 huge poisonous tentacles sprang out from the soil, and in the blink of an eye, they turned into 3 giant poisonous tentacles. This is not over yet. The long-distance attack is strengthened, and Regengine grows out a thin tube with sharp thorns. Enhanced features. The slender plant fiber tube swelled and grew, and turned into gun barrels that were at least 1 meter long, and the spikes inside were also enlarged in proportion. Seeing this frenzied strengthening, the sharp spines as thick as pigeon eggs, as the master Leonard gasped. There is no chance of selection in characteristic enhancement. It is to make the enhanced ability stronger on the basis of the already selected enhancement. The enhanced characteristics of the poisonous tentacles lie in long-range strikes and high-speed shooting. After the characteristics are strengthened, these enhancements have produced obvious increases, so the appearance has also undergone astonishing changes. Looking at the hideous appearance of 3 giant poisonous tentacles side by side, Leonard suddenly felt a very strong sense of security. Next, let's test the actual combat effect first. Leonard clapped his hands and said to all the poisonous tentacles, "Move forward and attack that giant monster." As soon as the words fell, the poisonous tentacles ready to go fired without the slightest delay, and fired a row of poisonous stings in the direction of the giant monster. This was just the beginning, Leonard noticed, and after about 2 seconds, another row of spikes shot out. With a speed of every 2 seconds, this attack frequency is already exaggerated. Leonard stopped the poisonous tentacles from continuing to shoot, intending to see the effect of the attack. But the most important thing is to look at the attack distance. Leonard didn't even see the stinger's flight path clearly, and almost in the blink of an eye, he found clusters of blood erupting from the sleeping troll. Accurate hit. The powerful impact and severe pain made the giant jump up with a bang. Before its simple brain could react what happened, the second wave of poisonous stings has arrived. Because the giant jumped up, this wave of stingers didn't hit all of them, only 2 poisonous stingers as thick as pigeon eggs pierced through the giant's left leg. The flesh and blood exploded, revealing Bisenson's leg bones, and a touch of purple spread from the wound. That's the venom of the poisonous tentacles. But for the giant monster, this bit of poison doesn't seem to be a big deal. However, Leonard noticed that the flight paths of those poisonous thorns did not seem to fall. Judging from the powerful spikes that fell into the ground, 60 meters is not the limit distance. The range of the stinger can go further. The second wave of poisonous stings exposed Leonard's position in this direction. The troll stared with one eye and saw Leonard standing in the distance. The simple-minded troll immediately realized that it was Leonard who attacked it, and ignored the 3 nearby plants that didn't have a little, delicious, or, smell. Mountain trolls can eat people, and wizards are also in their recipes. The troll casually grabbed the huge stick that looked like a big tree beside him, and rushed towards Leonard while waving it. Although his left leg was injured, it didn't stop his pace at all. The troll's speed was not satisfactory. It had covered a distance of 10 meters in 2 seconds, and the short 6 was only 12 seconds for it. However, looking at the giant monster that was about to rush towards him, Leonard acted very calmly, as if the foul-smelling giant monster did not exist. He glanced at the 3 poisonous tentacles ready to go. The accuracy is tested below, and the running troll is very suitable. Aim for the troll's head and fire, Leonard ordered. Following Leonard's order, the barrel of the poisonous tentacles rotated and focused on the head of the giant monster, and the dense stingers fired again. This time, instead of shooting a row of stingers, it shoots a bunch of stingers. In an instant, the giant monster's one eye was pierced by densely packed poisonous thorns. The giant screamed in pain, and the toxin quickly eroded the brain of the giant, trying to take its life. But the strong vitality allowed it to survive, staring at the head of a patient with enough density phobia to be frightened for a lifetime, rushing towards Leonard. This is the idea of dying together. Apparently trolls aren't that stupid either. It's a pity that under the continuous poisonous stings, the giant monster's movements became slower and slower. It took huge strides with difficulty, and in the end, the short distance of more than 10 meters was like reaching the sky. Leonard looked at the swaying troll and the wooden stick in the troll's hand, silently stepped back more than 10 meters, and then aimed at the 3 giant poisonous tentacles and released magic. Disarm. Leonard used his only offensive magic, and frantically used his wand to strengthen it to the maximum. However, the magic that is enough to crush people against the wall did not have any effect on the 3 giant poisonous tentacles. After hearing a crisp sound like breaking glass, Leonard's magic disappeared without a trace. However, the 3 giant poisonous tentacles seemed to have been injected with chicken blood. The branches that were originally giants grew again, and the speed of the poisonous stinger spray reached an astonishing half a second. Magic Devour. Magic Rage. The effect of the defensive strengthening branch can be called a wizard killer. When facing wizards, these 2 talent enhancements can defeat most wizards. Under the baptism of the stinger like a storm, soon, the troll could not hold on. It stared at the head that had been blown into a hedgehog, slowly knelt down, and fell forward feebly. But the poisonous tentacle that received Leonard's order to target the head has no intention of stopping, because this is Leonard's order, not its self-reaction. In the end, the head of the troll finally survived the heavy pressure under the frenzied shooting of the stinger, and it exploded gorgeously. And without the giant monster's head, the giant poisonous tentacles also stopped attacking, but the effect of the magic runaway still hasn't faded. It's really amazing. Leonard stood in the distance and looked at the corpse of the giant monster that fell in front of the poisonous tentacles, and couldn't help but give a thumbs up to his plant. It can only be said that it is worthy of strengthening the talent of the combat department, and the effect in combat is impressive. But that's not enough. Leonard still has a strengthening effect that he hasn't tried yet. Leonard clicked on the system, and used the enhancement points he just obtained to light up the self-explosion in the offensive reinforcement branch. Leonard then cast a powerful disarming spell on the giant poisonous tentacles again. This time there is no sound of glass breaking, but all the magic power being forcibly absorbed. The originally swollen giant poisonous tentacles swelled again, but this time it became Mama Jow, red all over and very unstable. Then blew yourself up, Leonard ordered. Eliminate the troll's body. As Leonard's voice fell, the 3 giant poisonous tentacles suddenly swelled, and the side facing the giant monster's corpse split open. The huge magic power impact turned the branches, tentacles, and poisonous thorns of the poisonous tentacles into deadly weapons, and they were swept away like a storm under the influence of the magic power impact. A gorgeous one-way blew up. Accompanied by the sound of the explosion, the bones of the 3 giant poisonous tentacles were gone, and the body of the giant monster that was hit head-on was torn to pieces by the impact of magic power, leaving only large pieces of bones scattered all over the place, and the flesh and blood had long since been blown away. Negative. Most of the feces and ground were blown away by the magic impact. Looking at the traces left by the poisonous tentacle's self-explosion, Leonard left here satisfied. His development direction is indeed correct, that is, he should first develop combat talent enhancement. Leonard spent an hour running back to Hogwarts. Even the body strengthened by the ancient sprouts couldn't stand such a long distance running back and forth. After returning to the castle, Leonard was hungry and thirsty. It's just that there is still some time before dinner at this time. In order not to be hungry, Leonard can only run to the kitchen. As a Hufflepuff living next to the kitchen, how can you refuse the delicious food fed by the hospitable house elves in the kitchen? As a Hufflepuff living next to the kitchen, how can you refuse the hospitable house elves in the kitchen? What about the food that the house elves feed? Leonard has fallen in love with the kitchen ever since he ran through it, because every time you walk into the kitchen, no matter what time of day you are greeted by the house elves, they will fill your stomach with freshly baked cookies and desserts, filling your stomach with delicious food. Fill your pockets. Leonard dragged his tired body to the basement, and came to a huge oil painting with ease. On the painting is a fruit plate on a table. Leonard stretched out his hand and scratched the pear in the fruit plate, watched the pear giggling and turned into a doorknob, and pushed the door open. Well, the function of the door handle is just a lock. In fact, the door only needs to appear and then pushed open to enter the door. The kitchen of Hogwarts is also a relatively mysterious place. Except for Hufflepuff, who has the best relationship with the house elves, few students from other colleges know this secret. Some people can't find the door of the Hogwarts kitchen, some people find the door but don't know where the mechanism is, and some people know the location of the door and the location of the mechanism but don't know that the door is pushed open. Only students with an inquiring spirit and good luck will find the Hogwarts kitchens. Of course, the students of Hufflepuff are not so troublesome. Freshmen like Leonard have caring seniors who tell them the location of the kitchen and how to enter, and also remind them not to tell people from other colleges. Hufflepuff students are good at keeping secrets. Pushing open the door of the kitchen, every time I walked, I saw a lively kitchen. It was almost time for dinner, and the house elves were busy preparing tonight's dinner. Leonard took a look and probably understood what to eat tonight. Minestrone soup with baked potatoes and steak. The style is a bit weird, but the wizard doesn't care about that, and neither does Leonard, as long as it tastes good. Soon the house elves noticed Leonard's arrival, and they flocked to Leonard regardless of whether they had work or not. Is there anything I can do to help you? Would you like some dim sum tonight? Would you like something to drink? Enthusiastic house elves surrounded Leonard, and several house elves ran over holding freshly baked cookies. Leonard drank a large cup of iced honey water here, and ate a few freshly baked honey biscuits, and when he was about to leave, he was stuffed with 10 paper packets of cakes by the enthusiastic house elf and walked out of the plate. Standing at the door of the kitchen, Leonard wiped the sweat from his brow, hiccuped and walked towards the common room with some blissful helplessness. These house elves are so enthusiastic that if they come here every day, Leonard worries that he will soon become the size of Goyle and Crabbe. This is terrible. Back in the Hufflepuff common room, Leonard walked in through the aisle holding a paper bag full of honey biscuits, and was about to invite everyone to eat biscuits when he saw the scene where he was asked to hold his forehead. Leonard is definitely not the only Hufflepuff who has this idea. He saw the decent Hufflepuffs sitting on the sofa by the fireplace, eating around a pile of desserts. Except for those who go out to study in the library, most of Hufflepuff's students gather here. Of course, some people choose to finish their homework in the common room, but how efficient is the atmosphere of chatting while eating snacks? Only those who learn can know DBAC. Oh, someone came back with snacks. Justin saw Leonard and quickly waved his hand and said, "Come on Leonard, we're having a snack banquet." With a blush, Leonard dumped a paper bag of paltry biscuits onto his plate. "Anyway, I brought it back for everyone to eat, so it's good to share it together." Justin was the first to pick up a biscuit and taste a piece and nodded, "We haven't had any honey biscuits just out of the oven." Leonard glanced at the various but unrepeated snacks on the table, and closed his eyes. The custard biscuits are made in the kitchen at noon for the snacks in the auditorium for the self-study students. The cookies decorated with cranberries seem to be baked around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. There are also muffins covered with maple syrup, which are fresh the pumpkin juice. Coupled with the honey biscuits brought by Leonard, it can be seen that this dim sum banquet has been going on for a long time, and every once in a while a Hufflepuff comes over with new dim sum. "Eating so many dim sum, are you still planning to eat tonight?" Leonard complained. "Of course I want to eat it, but eating dessert doesn't conflict with dinner." Ernie said vaguely with a cookie stuffed in his mouth, "By the way Leonard, where have you been today? I haven't seen you all day." "I walked around the castle, planning to find a hidden place to practice magic." Leonard casually found a reason. It seems that the news that he rescued Malfoy has not spread yet, but yes, those who were near the auditorium at that time were all careful students. Although they heard interesting news, they would not go to find friends to share it, at most discuss in the auditorium. It is estimated that when the Hufflepuff students waiting in the auditorium return, what Leonard did will spread, and everyone will know that Leonard ignored the past and saved the stupid Slytherin who was entangled in the devil's net. "Then you missed someone." Ernie took a sip of tea and swallowed the biscuit and said, "There is a girl looking for you. She has been waiting for you outside the common room for a long time." "A girl is looking for me." Leonard was stunned for a moment. "Who is it? Could it be Hermione?" "It's Lowen Keluo's student. It looks very cute," Justin replied quickly. "A student of Lowen Keluo? There should be only one Lowen Keluo girl that I have had a relationship with, right?" Leonard thought of Padma Patil, who was with him in potions class, because Snape targeted him, and she was also affected by Leonard's partner in potions class. But what is she asking of herself? "I've heard of that girl." At this time, the round-faced girl Susan Burns came over. "Her name is Padma Patil, and some people say she is the most beautiful girl in Lowen Keluo." "Best looking," Justin recalled. "I just remember she was Leonard's partner in potions." "Yeah, she's very brave." Susan nodded. "I wouldn't dare to stare at Snape's pressure and team up with Leonard." "Maybe they have a purpose in the first place." Hannah Ibo came over and said mysteriously, "I heard about Leonard from many people in other colleges." "Is it about Leonard defeating 6 Slytherins?" Ernie looked envious. "That sounds really impressive. If it was you, we would probably go to the school hospital to see you, and look at your miserable appearance." Justin complained, "Although I don't know how Leonard did it, he must be very powerful." "The rumor in Slytherin is that Leonard knocked them down with his fist." Hannah Abbott glanced at Ernie's physique. "Although you look bigger than Leonard, you are definitely not as strong as Leonard." "Is there?" Ernie looked at Leonard depressed, always feeling that his body was much tougher than Leonard's. "That's not the point. Don't forget, there was a girl who came to Leonard but Leonard didn't see her." Susan said regretfully, "That girl must be very disappointed. Then Leonard should go to her." Hannah clasped her hands on her chest expectantly. "Sounds a bit romantic." "Leonard, romantic." Leonard's mouth twitched. "A group of 11-year-old brats say it's romantic. Wouldn't it be good to read more books?" "Don't you think so?" "Leonard, they came to you on their own initiative." Hannah said, "You can't ignore them. Can't everyone come to me and I have to take the initiative to find someone later, right? Then I'm still busy." Leonard half lied on the sofa, paralyzed there and didn't want to move. He didn't feel it when he didn't rest, but when he rested, his fatigue broke out, so he didn't want to get up at all. This body still lacks exercise. While nibbling on a biscuit, Leonard thought about getting up an hour earlier every morning, going to the botanical garden and doing morning exercises along the way. There is no shortage of exercise, going to the botanical garden, and no lack of sleep. If you go at night, you can only do one thing. From now on, I will go to bed early at night, go to bed early and get up early to develop good habits while also exercising a good body. Leonard doesn't expect to become Gandalf in White, who can cut people with a knife when he lights up his lighting technique, but he can't become a weak chicken who pants after 2 steps. Seeing Leonard's lazy look, Hannah sighed. Opportunities are rare, and there are not many girls who really have the courage to come here, huh? As soon as Hannah finished speaking, there was a noisy sound from the entrance passage of the common room. Near dinner time, the auditorium needs to be emptied, and the students who study there are all back. Headed by Hufflepuff's prefect Truman, he looked around after he came in, and immediately locked onto Leonard, who was slumped on the sofa. "Leonard, someone is looking for you," Truman yelled. "It's a girl from Gryffindor." Leonard, who was lying dead, raised his head helplessly, and looked at the surrounding friends. Hannah bit her nails with a look of astonishment, but soon she had a calm expression. "It's a girl from Gryffindor, no wonder." Hannah nodded as if I was right, they are very brave. "A girl is looking for you again." Ernie looked envious. "I hope to be as popular as you." "Don't make trouble, maybe it's business." Leonard yawned and got up from the sofa. "The only girl Gryffindor will come to find him is Hermione, right? If it's Hermione, it should be something serious. After all, they were doing homework together yesterday, and Hermione was no different back then." Leonard didn't think Hermione could hide her emotions from him. "By the way, Leonard, I heard that you saved Malfoy," Truman said. "It's a bit unbelievable. Why would you save someone like that?" "Saved Malfoy." The friends looked at Leonard in surprise, as if wondering if the soul in Leonard's body was still his own. "Why are you saving Malfoy?" "He keeps making trouble for you," Justin said. Justin hated Malfoy's views on bloodlines very much, which made Justin feel disgusted, so naturally he didn't have a good impression. "I don't want to save him, either, but my main consideration is the consequences of not saving him." Leonard shrugged and said to Truman, "Didn't you hear what his 2 followers shouted? They said I killed him." "Malfoy." "I heard that other people said that these 2 people are like crazy." Truman nodded. "If I don't save Malfoy, then their words will come true." Leonard stood up and said, "I don't want to be thrown into Azkaban as a murderer because of that rotten Malfoy." Truman suddenly said, "It turns out that this is the case. You are very thoughtful. If it were me, I would be suspected of being a murderer, as you said. We're not Gryffindor, we always have to think about the consequences before doing anything." Leonard said lazily, "Hurting Gryffindor, by the way." Amidst laughter, Leonard left the common room and saw Hermione at the door. "Hermione, can I do anything for you?" Leonard asked. "It's something. Of course it's something, and it's not a trivial matter," Hermione said. Harry and Neville went to the 3rd-floor corridor. "Huh," Leonard froze for a moment. "Corridor on the 3rd floor. What are they doing there?" Leonard asked. "It's a bit complicated to talk about. Do you know Nicholas?" Hermione pulled Leonard. "We talked as we walked." "Nicholas May. Is this going to enter the plot? But isn't it too strange? I just found out that Nicholas May is going to break through. Isn't this too reckless?" "What's going on?" Leonard asked. After seeing the news of Gringotts being robbed, Harry said that Hagrid took away the robbed gold curry, so whenever he had time, he asked Hagrid what that thing was. Hermione explained. After asking too many questions, Hagrid slipped the tongue and said that the thing belonged to Nicholas May. "Later, I found out Nicholas May's Philosopher's Stone." Leonard nodded expressionlessly. "Everyone seems to be very strong in combat, and they found out about the Philosopher's Stone so long in advance. But what does this have to do with Harry, Neville breaking through? Is the Savior planning to steal the Philosopher's Stone? It's Ron Weasley who shared the dormitory with Harry and the others." Hermione said helplessly. Harry and Neville didn't pay attention to their surroundings when they were talking about this topic, and Ron Weasley overheard them. "Very good. Very pure Gryffindor, very skilled at plotting loudly." "And then?" Leonard asked. Then Ron Weasley satirized them, saying that they were talking nonsense like that. Hermione sighed. He didn't believe what Harry and Neville said at all, and even thought they were just trying to gain attention. Then let me guess. Could it be that Harry couldn't bear this grievance, and planned to break into the corridor on the third floor to show Ron Weasley the Philosopher's Stone to prove that he wasn't lying? Leonard raised his forehead. Nice and Harry. Probably that's it. Hermione said helplessly. They have already passed 2:40, and I can't stop them, so I came to you. What's the use of looking for me? You should look for the professor at this time. Leonard said blankly. This is what he thinks. Come to him if you have any trouble. He is not the blue civet cat named Doraemon. But if you ask the professor, they will be punished, Hermione said. Leonard looked at Hermione and said, it should be punished too, otherwise they don't know how stupid it is to take risks for verbal disputes. Hermione paused, also thinking that something was wrong with her behavior. Leaving aside whether Harry and Neville should be punished or not, it seemed a little too much to drag Leonard there without knowing the danger in the corridor on the third floor. What to do in case of danger? But it's really urgent right now. Seeing Hermione, who was frozen in place as if the CPU had been burned, Leonard broke free from Hermione's hand and said, you go to the professor, I'll go to the corridor on the third floor to have a look. Saving Harry Potter, Leonard thought it could be done, so he made an investment in advance, and by the way, brushed up Dumbledore's favorability. Anyway, because of Hermione's behavior of coming to him after this accident, sooner or later, Bullido will pay attention. Then be careful. Leonard's words made Hermione wake up, who was about to report an error in her head, and ran towards Professor McGonagall's office without hesitation. Meanwhile, the corridor on the right side of the second floor of Hogwarts Castle. Harry and Neville walked towards the shabby-looking wooden door at the end of the corridor. Harry's expression was firm but angry, as if he would not give up until he reached his goal. In contrast, Neville's expression was a little frightened. He hid behind Harry, who was smaller than him, his voice trembling. Ha, Harry, are we really going to go there? Navis trembled. Didn't Headmaster Dumbledore say it's dangerous there? If you don't die in pain, don't go near there. Don't be discouraged, Neville, and don't forget that we are brave Gryffindors, not Ron Weasley's kind of lip service. Harry's tone was firm, but his trembling little hands betrayed his nervousness. He was a little bit stuck, and thinking of the ugly face of the red-haired mouse taunting them, Harry couldn't swallow his breath. Anyway, today he's going to make a dash, get the Philosopher's Stone, and hit that Weasley in the face with that precious treasure. When he came to the wooden door, Harry looked at the locked wooden door and reached out to fiddle with the bolt. But it seemed that the door was locked. No matter how hard Harry tried, he couldn't open it. The door is locked, Harry, let's go, Neville said with a sigh of relief. No, we can't give up. Harry gritted his teeth, but the fact that the door was locked, he really couldn't open the door. What is more uncomfortable than dying before leaving the army is that the warrior rushed to the Tower of the Devil to attack the devil, but was blocked by the door lock of the devil's house. Undeterred, Harry put his ear to the door, trying to get a little information. Even if he couldn't get in, he had to find out some news, otherwise he wouldn't be reconciled, and he would definitely be laughed at by that Weasley when he went back. Seeing Harry's appearance, Neville also put his ear to the door tentatively. Did you hear anything? Harry asked, looking at Neville next to him. There seems to be a little, like the sound of something cooing. Neville said. Harry blushed. I'm sorry, that's my stomach calling my daughter-in-law. I'm a little hungry. Neville looked at Harry helplessly. In this case, shall we go to dinner? No, you have to know something. Harry hadn't finished his retort when he heard a dull roar coming from the door. Harry and Neville's faces turned pale, and they sat on the ground in shock. What's that sound? Harry felt his teeth chatter. No, I don't know, it's like a dog barking, but it's a bit vague and accented. Neville said uncertainly and then shivered. Let's go back, Neville continued. This can be regarded as finding out something. Quote. Harry was a little reconciled to hearing this, but when he saw the tightly locked wooden door, he nodded unwillingly. At this moment, both palms were on Harry's shoulders at the same time, which startled Harry. It seems that you have encountered difficulties. A relaxed voice sounded. Do you need our help? The second voice was slightly low, but still with a lively tone. Harry and Neville turned their heads in horror, and saw two big boys with red hair who looked exactly the same. Are you Weasley? Neville looked at their red hair. I remember. It seems to you that his name is George and my name is Fred. The voice said clearly. Yes, we are indeed Weasley, just look at our red hair. Another boy named George said in a low voice. Weasley, what's your relationship with Ron Weasley? Harry couldn't help asking. Good question. George spread his hands. That's our dear brother. We have a lot to do with him. Though he's not too happy for us to care. The two of you spoke to each other. What are you doing here? Hearing that it was Ron Weasley's big brother, Harry's eyes were full of vigilance. These two aren't the ones Ron Weasley asked them to come over for a joke, did they? Didn't we talk? George and Weasley pulled Harry and Neville up one by one. We're here to help. It's rare that someone is willing to come here to explore. We've been looking forward to it for a long time. George and Fred said with a smile. But aren't you Ron Weasley's big brothers? Why are you helping us? Harry asked suspiciously. We are his big brother. But we are not obliged to help him, and what exactly we want to do has nothing to do with him. But he doesn't really have any bad intentions, it's just a little awkward. George and Fred spoke to each other one by one. Maybe, Harry said nonchalantly, but that door is locked, do you have a way to open it? A locked door. George and Fred looked at each other and said in unison, then you need an unlocking spell. Unlocking spell. Alahuadonkai, this is the lock-picking spell. This spell is a magic spell of a friend called a thief. It can open any kind of lock that has no magic protection. George said. Of course, this is also a kind of magic that is necessary for pranks. Fred walked to the door with a smile, just like this. Pointing to the lock with his wand, he said, Allahu hole is open. With a soft sound, the door lock automatically opened. It's so convenient. Neville was dumbfounded. We also feel the same way. We found this spell in the library and learned it by ourselves. Fortunately, this spell is not difficult. George blinked, then let's go in now. Wait, let's talk about it before we go in again. Seeing that it was really going in, Neville quickly said, it's dangerous inside. Of course we know it's dangerous. It's not dangerous and we don't want to go yet. The twins don't care. There seems to be a terrible monster inside, and Harry and I just heard a terrible sound coming from inside. Neville couldn't help swallowing when he said this. That's worth noting, but we have a way. Fred and George took out a spherical object from under their robes as they spoke. Dang dong dong. Portable mobile swamp. George and the two made funny sound effects, and raised the ball in front of them. This is our new invention, which can turn a place into a swamp. Fred said braggingly, this is a joke prop developed by ourselves. With this, any monster that isn't flying will be trapped by the swamp. George said proudly, since the monster you mentioned is indoors, it can't fly. With this, we can trap the monster. Then it went through. It sounds reasonable, and the feasibility is very high. Harry became excited, and Neville felt relieved. So under the leadership of George and Fred, Harry and Neville approached the trap door. I'll open the door first and have a look. Fred made a silent gesture to the people behind him, quietly pushed the wooden door open, and poked his head out to look inside. My God, Fred exclaimed, making Harry and Neville's hearts itch like being scratched by a cat. They were tempted to ask what was in there, but Fred told them to keep their voices down so they didn't dare to disturb them. Fred, what's in there? George asked in a low voice, not caring so much. Fred smiled mysteriously, pushed the door open and said, see for yourself, remember to cover your mouth and don't scream. The wooden door was pushed open with a creak, and the scene inside the room was displayed in front of Harry and Neville. It's just a very common room, the only difference is that there is an unusually big guy in it. After seeing a certain giant in the room, Harry and Neville almost screamed out, but at a critical moment, they remembered Fred's words and covered their mouths, and then suppressed the scream. It was a huge black dog, lying on the floor and sleeping soundly. The sound they heard at the door before was the snoring of this black dog. It's just that the size of this black dog is very different from the size of the dog that Harry and Neville recognize. When Harry saw the dog, he remembered the elephant the Dursleys had seen when they took him to the zoo. This guy is bigger than an elephant, and what's more, it has a head. Harry and Neville began to rejoice in their hearts. It was a good thing that the door was locked just now, and they didn't know how to unlock it themselves, otherwise if they opened the door and encountered such a monster, they might have screamed out in fright. If this monster was alarmed, Harry and Neville felt that their mother's small size would not be enough for this dog's teeth. Well, a head full of teeth. Several people walked in tiptoely, looking at the huge three-headed dog. George sighed softly, I didn't expect there to be such a dangerous thing in Hogwarts. Several people circled the three-headed dog, and finally found a trapdoor under the three-headed dog. This also shows that the things below must be very important, but I just don't know what it is. Fred said, pointing to the trapdoor under the three-headed dog. I know, the Philosopher's Stone is underneath, Harry said without hesitation, afraid that he would speak slowly. Magic stone. What is that? A stone made by Nicole Flamel. It is said that it can turn stones into gold and make elixir of life, Harry said seriously. Neville on the side looked blankly at Harry's detailed explanation. Is this something you can talk to people casually? Shouldn't this kind of thing be kept secret? Is this a jar? Turn a stone into gold. The elixir of life. George and Fred glanced at each other, their expressions became serious. What's the matter? Aren't you going to go down and have a look? Harry asked. No, we don't plan to go down, and we advise you not to go down, George said seriously. Although we love pranks, this thing obviously exceeded our expectations. We just thought it was a fun test at first, Fred also said. Obviously, that's Dumbledore or what you call Nicole Flamel's stuff, it's too precious, we can't touch it casually, George said seriously. We don't recommend you touch it either. Dumbledore must have his reasons for keeping it tightly, maybe some dangerous person is watching the Sorcerer's Stone. Fred also became serious, we should leave at this time. Wait, do you feel that it's too quiet here? Neville suddenly let out a cry. The bodies of several people froze, and after listening carefully, they realized that the room had indeed suddenly become quiet. A voice that had been there just now disappeared. Is it snoring? The snoring is gone. George had an embarrassed expression on his face. It seems that we have upset the tenants here. Several people heard the low roar of anger coming from above their heads. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.